Victor Hale spent 15 years building an empire on fear, until a red light changed everything. The woman crossing the street with newborn twins was Rowan Blake, the fiancée he abandoned 3 years ago with one brutal line: "Family makes you weak." Now she's raising a boy and a girl alone, and Victor's world is unraveling. The DNA test confirms what his gut already knew: they're his. But Rowan won't accept his money, his apologies, or his protection. She offers one condition: prove you're a father with time, not cash. And Victor Hale, Seattle's most feared kingpin, is about to learn that the only thing more dangerous than his enemies is becoming the man his children deserve. If you want to see how far this story of second chances and impossible choices goes, stay until the end, and drop a like and comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this journey travels. Victor Hale had learned early that Seattle's rain didn't wash anything clean. It just made the dirt harder to see. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, watching the city blur beneath sheets of gray water. 40 stories below, people moved like ants through Pike Place Market, unaware that half the businesses lining those historic brick streets paid protection money that eventually filtered up to him. The legitimate half of his empire, luxury real estate, private security consulting, high-end investment portfolios, gleamed in quarterly reports his lawyers presented to the IRS. The other half lived in encrypted ledgers, cash-stuffed storage units, and the unspoken fear that kept Seattle's underworld running smooth. Victor had built this kingdom methodically. No flashy violence, no turf wars that attracted federal attention, just quiet leverage, strategic partnerships, and the kind of reputation that made problems disappear before they started. At 37, he'd survived longer than most men in his position by following one unbreakable rule: never give anyone leverage over you, which made his current situation particularly pathetic. "You're not even listening." Sloane Pierce's voice carried the practiced disappointment of a woman who'd perfected the art of beautiful suffering. She sat on the leather sofa across the room, one leg crossed over the other, her designer dress draped perfectly over her tall frame. Everything about Sloane was polished: her honey blonde hair, her understated jewelry, the way she could walk into any restaurant in the city and have the staff scrambling to accommodate her. Victor had been dating her for 8 months. She was intelligent, sophisticated, and refreshingly uninterested in pushing for more than he was willing to give. No tears about commitment, no demands for emotional vulnerability, just elegant companionship and mutually satisfying physical chemistry. It should have been perfect. "I'm listening," Victor said, though they both knew he wasn't. Sloane uncrossed her legs and stood, smoothing her dress with hands that had never done real work. "You've been somewhere else for weeks now, distracted. Whatever it is, I'm not interested in competing with it." She wasn't wrong. Victor had been distracted, though he couldn't articulate why. Something restless had been building beneath his skin, a feeling like standing at the edge of a cliff and hearing the rocks crumble under his feet. He'd tried to attribute it to business pressures, to the usual paranoia that came with his line of work. But the truth was simpler and more unsettling. He was bored. Not with the empire, not even with Sloane specifically, just bored with the whole architecture of his carefully controlled life. "I'm here now," he offered, turning from the window. Sloane studied him with the cool assessment of someone deciding whether to invest more energy in a losing proposition. "Are you?" Before Victor could formulate an answer that would smooth things over without actually promising anything, his phone buzzed. Leo Park's name flashed on the screen, his right-hand man and the only person whose calls Victor took during personal time. "I need to take this," Victor said. Sloane's laugh was sharp and knowing. "Of course you do," Victor answered without apologizing. "What is it?" "Nothing urgent," Leo said, his tone suggesting he knew exactly what he was interrupting. "Just confirming dinner tomorrow with the Vancouver group, 7 o'clock at Canlis." "Fine. We'll talk logistics in the morning." He ended the call and found Sloane gathering her purse, her movements precise and final. "This isn't working, Victor." He should have felt something: disappointment, regret, even mild inconvenience. Instead, all he felt was a distant sense of relief. "You deserve someone who can give you more attention," he said, meaning it. "I deserve someone who wants to," Sloane corrected. She crossed to him, rose on her toes, and pressed a kiss to his cheek with the fond detachment of someone closing a business transaction. You're not a bad man, Victor, just an unavailable one. I hope you figure out what you're actually looking for before you waste more time pretending you already found it." She left without drama, her heels clicking across the marble floor with the confident rhythm of a woman who knew she'd find someone better within a month. Victor poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and returned to the window. The rain was getting heavier, turning the city into an impressionist painting of light and shadow. He'd built an empire on clarity, on seeing angles others missed, on staying 3 steps ahead of everyone around him. So why did he suddenly feel like he was standing still? The red light caught him at Pike and Fourth 2 days later. Victor didn't usually drive himself. Leo handled transportation along with a dozen other daily logistics. But this afternoon he'd wanted space to think. The meeting with the Vancouver group had gone smoothly, another strategic alliance that would expand his influence north without attracting attention. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. He should have felt satisfied. Instead, he felt that same restless itch, like his life was a suit tailored perfectly, but fundamentally wrong. The light was taking forever. Victor tapped his fingers against the steering wheel of his black Audi, watching pedestrians cross the intersection. Rain misted the windshield. A bus hissed past, spraying water. Someone's umbrella turned inside out in the wind. Then he saw her. The woman crossing the street wasn't particularly tall or dramatically beautiful. She wore a practical raincoat and moved with the careful deliberation of someone carrying precious cargo. But something in her posture, the set of her shoulders, the angle of her head, sent recognition slamming through Victor's chest like a physical blow. Rowan Blake. 3 years. He hadn't seen her in 3 years, and his brain supplied the details his eyes couldn't quite confirm from this distance. Dark brown hair that always smelled like vanilla. Gray eyes that could slice through his bullshit in seconds. A smile that had once made him believe he could be something better than what he was. His fiancée. The woman he'd left. The woman he'd had to leave. Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Rowan reached the sidewalk and adjusted her burden. And that's when he saw them. 2 infant car seats, 1 in each hand, the kind with removable carriers. Twins. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Victor watched Rowan disappear under an awning, efficiently maneuvering the carriers through a coffee shop door. Behind him, someone honked. The light had turned green. He drove through the intersection on autopilot, his mind racing through calculations that didn't want to add up. 3 years since he'd ended things. The babies looked young, very young. Newborn, maybe. It couldn't be. Victor pulled into a parking garage 2 blocks away and sat in the dim concrete silence, his pulse hammering in his ears. He tried to remember the exact timeline. He'd proposed to Rowan 4 years ago, a moment of weakness and hope he'd almost immediately regretted. She'd said yes. They'd been planning a small wedding. Everything had felt possible and terrifying in equal measure. Then Mikhail Petrov happened. Mikhail had been a rival operator, old-school Russian mob with a taste for brutality Victor had always avoided. Mikhail had kidnapped the teenage daughter of a city councilman, intending to use her as leverage in some Byzantine protection scheme. The kidnapping had been sloppy, desperate, the kind of move that drew federal attention nobody wanted. Victor had found the girl first. He'd returned her unharmed, then made sure Mikhail Petrov was never found at all. The councilman had been grateful. The FBI had been frustrated, and Rowan had been horrified. Not at what Victor had done to Mikhail. Rowan understood the necessities of his world better than most. She'd been horrified at what almost happened, at the realization that being with Victor meant living adjacent to that kind of danger, at the possibility that someday someone might use her the way Mikhail had used that girl. "I can't build a life wondering when someone will use me to hurt you," she'd said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I can't bring children into this world knowing they could be leverage." And Victor, staring at the woman he loved more than he'd thought possible to love anything, had made the hardest decision of his life. "You're right," he'd said. "Family makes you weak. It gives people leverage. I can't afford that." He'd said it to set her free, to give her a reason to leave that was about him being wrong, not her being afraid, to make the break clean enough that she'd actually go. It had worked. Rowan had left Seattle that week. No forwarding address, no contact. She'd vanished as completely as if she'd never existed, and Victor had told himself it was for the best, that he'd saved her from a life of looking over her shoulder, that loving someone meant sometimes letting them go before they got hurt. He'd buried himself in work and convinced himself the hollow ache in his chest was just the price of keeping her safe. Now sitting in his car with his heart trying to punch through his ribs, Victor pulled out his phone and called Leo. "I need you to find someone," he said without preamble. "Rowan Blake, she's back in Seattle." Leo knew better than to ask questions when Victor used that tone. "How soon do you need this?" "Yesterday." "I'll call you back in 2 hours." Victor ended the call and stared at the concrete wall in front of him. The logical part of his brain, the part that had built an empire through careful analysis and strategic thinking, was insisting he was jumping to conclusions. Rowan could have met someone else. The timing could be coincidence. The babies might not be his. But the part of his brain that had kept him alive through 15 years in the underworld, the part that read situations and calculated angles faster than conscious thought, was screaming a different truth. Those twins were his. And Rowan hadn't told him. "Dr. Salt," Leo called back in 90 minutes. "Found her," he said, his voice carrying the neutral professionalism he used when delivering information he knew would hurt. "She's living in a studio apartment in Rainier Valley, working part-time at a nonprofit called Family Bridges. It's an adoption support organization. The twins are 3 months old, boy and girl, Jack and Lily Blake." Victor's hand clenched around the phone. "Blake, not Hale. No father listed on the birth certificates." The words hit like a fist to the gut. Victor stood at his penthouse window again, watching Seattle glitter in the evening darkness, and tried to process what he was feeling. Rage at being kept in the dark. Terror at what this meant. Grief for 3 months of his children's lives he'd already missed. And underneath all of it, a bone-deep certainty that his carefully constructed world had just shattered. "Where exactly?" he asked. Leo rattled off an address. "Victor, what do you want me to do with this?" It was a fair question. Leo had been with him for 12 years. He knew where the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. He also knew Victor well enough to recognize when his boss was standing on the edge of a decision that would change everything. "Nothing yet," Victor said. "I'll handle this myself." He ended the call before Leo could offer the warning they both knew was coming. "Be careful. This is the kind of leverage that gets people killed." Victor had spent 3 years convincing himself that walking away from Rowan was the right choice. The safe choice. The choice that protected both of them from the inevitable cost of weakness in his world. Now he stood in his empty penthouse, surrounded by the spoils of his empire, and realized he'd been lying to himself the whole time. He hadn't left to protect Rowan. He'd left because he was afraid. Afraid of being vulnerable. Afraid of giving someone the power to destroy him. Afraid of becoming his father, a man who'd loved his family so much he'd made catastrophic decisions trying to protect them. Decisions that had ultimately gotten him killed and left Victor's mother to raise a son alone in the wreckage. Victor had sworn he'd never be weak like that. Instead, he'd just been a coward. He looked at the address Leo had sent. Rainier Valley wasn't a war zone, but it wasn't safe either. The neighborhood had been slowly gentrifying for years, pushing low-income residents into smaller spaces, while developers built expensive condos that nobody local could afford. Rowan was living in a studio apartment with 3-month-old twins, working part-time, raising 2 children alone, while he sat in a penthouse worth more than she'd probably earn in a decade. Victor grabbed his keys. The building where Rowan lived was exactly what he'd expected. Old brick, tired paint, a security door that probably hadn't worked in years. Victor stood on the sidewalk in the rain, staring up at the 4th-floor windows and trying to calm the chaos in his chest. He'd faced down drug cartels and federal investigators without breaking a sweat. He'd orchestrated operations involving millions of dollars and hundreds of people without second-guessing himself. But the thought of knocking on Rowan's door made his hands shake. A young woman emerged from the building, propping the security door open with her hip while she wrestled with an umbrella. Victor caught the door before it closed and stepped into a dim hallway that smelled like old carpet and cooking grease. 4th floor. No elevator. He climbed the stairs slowly, buying time to figure out what he was going to say. "I saw you crossing the street with my children, and I need to know why you didn't tell me. I know I walked away, but that doesn't give you the right to keep this from me." "Are they mine?" "I need you to tell me the truth." All of it sounded accusatory. Entitled. Like he had any right to be angry when he was the one who'd drawn the line in the sand 3 years ago. He reached apartment 4C and stood outside the door, listening. Silence. Then a baby's cry, sharp and insistent. Footsteps. A woman's voice, soft and soothing. Okay, okay, I know. I'm getting it. Just give me 2 seconds, sweetheart. Rowan's voice. The sound of it hit him harder than he'd braced for. Victor raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What was he doing here? What did he actually want? The logical answer was verification, DNA test, legal custody arrangements, financial support. The responsible steps a man took when confronted with unexpected paternity. But standing outside that door, listening to Rowan comfort a crying baby, Victor knew the truth was far more complicated and dangerous. He wanted in. Not just into their lives as a checkbook father who showed up for birthdays and graduations. He wanted the messy, terrifying, impossible thing he convinced himself he could never have. He wanted to be a father. Before he could talk himself out of it, Victor knocked. The footsteps stopped. A long pause. Then the door opened 6 inches, still chained, and Rowan Blake looked out at him with eyes that hadn't forgotten a single thing. She'd changed in 3 years. Her face was leaner, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and relentless stress. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun. She wore leggings and an oversized sweatshirt with what looked like spit up on the shoulder. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Hello, Victor," Rowan said, her voice carefully neutral. "I wondered when you'd show up." She didn't invite him in immediately. Rowan stood in the doorway with the chain still fastened, studying him the way she used to study complex problems, methodically, looking for angles and weak points. Behind her, the baby was still crying, the sound escalating toward hysteria. "I saw you," Victor said, because starting with accusations seemed like a bad strategy. "2 days ago, at the intersection downtown." "I know, I saw you too." Rowan glanced over her shoulder as the crying intensified. "I need to feed her. If you're going to do this now, you might as well come in. But if you're here to make threats or throw money around, you can leave." She closed the door to unfasten the chain, then opened it fully and stepped aside. Victor entered Rowan's world and felt his carefully maintained composure crack. The studio apartment was tiny, maybe 400 square feet. A kitchenette occupied one corner, separated from the main living space by a narrow counter. A double bed was pushed against the far wall, flanked by 2 bassinets. A changing table, a small dresser, and a rocking chair comprised the only other furniture. Everything was meticulously clean but obviously well used and budget grade. This was where his children lived. Rowan crossed to one of the bassinets and lifted out a red-faced, wailing baby girl. She settled into the rocking chair with practiced efficiency, adjusted her shirt, and began nursing. The baby's cries cut off immediately, replaced by satisfied snuffling sounds. "That's Lily," Rowan said, her voice soft now that the crisis was handled. "The quiet one over there is Jack." Victor looked at the second bassinet and felt his heart stop. The baby boy was awake, staring up at a mobile of fabric stars with an expression of intense concentration. He had Rowan's nose and mouth, but his eyes, even from this distance, Victor could see they were the same unusual hazel green as his own. The baby's tiny fist waved in the air, tracking the movement of the stars. His son. "Sit down before you fall down," Rowan said, not unkindly. "You look like you're going to pass out." Victor sank into the only other chair, a folding metal thing that had probably come from a garage sale. His mind was racing, trying to calculate, to find the angle that would let him regain control of this situation. But there was no angle, no leverage, just the overwhelming reality of 2 3-month-old babies and the woman he'd loved enough to leave. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out rougher than he'd intended. Rowan looked up from Lily, her gray eyes steady and unreadable. "You made your position on family pretty clear 3 years ago, Victor. I didn't see the point in begging you to change your mind." "You didn't even give me the choice. Didn't I?" Rowan's voice stayed calm, but something sharp flickered in her eyes. "You told me family makes you weak, that you couldn't afford that kind of vulnerability. What exactly was I supposed to do with that information when I found out I was pregnant? Show up at your penthouse and ask you to reconsider your deeply held convictions because biology happened?" Victor opened his mouth to argue, but she wasn't finished. "I knew you'd offer money. I knew you'd probably set up some kind of trust fund and arrange for security. What I didn't know was whether you'd resent them for existing. Whether you'd show up for 6 months and then disappear when it got hard. Whether loving them would feel like a weakness you had to overcome instead of the most important thing you'd ever do. She shifted Lily to her shoulder, patting the baby's back gently. So I made a choice. I chose to raise them without you rather than raise them with a father who might see them as a liability. The words landed like punches, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. 3 years ago, Victor absolutely would have seen children as a weakness, as leverage waiting to be exploited, as the exact kind of vulnerability that got people in his world killed. The question was whether he still believed that. I want a DNA test, he said quietly. Rowan didn't flinch. Fine. I'll sign whatever paperwork you need. For the record, there's been no one else. Not before you, not after you. But if you need scientific proof, I understand. Her easy agreement somehow made him feel worse. He'd expected defensiveness, resistance, something he could push against. Instead, she was just practical. Like this was an unpleasant task to be checked off a list rather than an emotional crisis. How have you been managing? Victor asked, genuinely curious. The apartment, the job, 2 babies alone, carefully. Rowan stood and carried Lily to the changing table, laying her down with the casual competence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. I saved money before they were born. Family Bridges lets me work from home 3 days a week. My neighbor downstairs watches them when I have to go in. We make it work. You shouldn't have to just make it work. Why not? Rowan fastened a fresh diaper and scooped Lily up, then crossed to Jack's bassinet. The baby boy had fallen asleep, his tiny face peaceful and perfect. People have been raising children on limited resources for thousands of years, Victor. We're not special. But they were special. They were his. The thought was so visceral and unexpected that Victor had to look away. I want to help, he said. With what? Money? Rowan settled back into the rocking chair with Lily, who was already drowsy and milk drunk. I don't want your money, Victor. I don't want a trust fund or a luxury apartment or any of the comfortable solutions you're probably already calculating. If you want to help, there's only one thing I need. Name it. Rowan looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between hope and grief and bone-deep exhaustion. Prove you want to be their father, she said quietly. Not their benefactor, not their guilty obligation, their actual father. Show up when it's hard, change diapers at 3 a.m. Figure out why Jack cries differently when he's hungry versus tired. Learn what makes Lily laugh. Be here for the boring, exhausting, unglamorous work of raising human beings. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer, but no less firm. If you can do that, if you can prove this isn't just a crisis of conscience that'll fade in 6 months, then we'll talk about what comes next. But I won't let you buy your way into their lives, and I won't let you drift in and out whenever it's convenient. Either you're in completely or you're out. There's no middle ground with children. Victor stared at her, this woman who'd once believed he could be better than he was, and realized she was offering him something far more challenging than any business deal or criminal operation he'd ever navigated. She was offering him a chance to actually change. When can I start? He asked. Rowan's laugh was quiet and almost sad. You just did. The DNA test took 3 days to process. Victor spent those 3 days in a state of controlled chaos. He canceled meetings. He delegated operations to Leo with vague explanations about personal matters. He sat in his penthouse and researched infant development, proper car seat installation, and the difference between various baby formula brands. He felt completely insane. Leo showed up on the second day with takeout and questions Victor didn't want to answer. You're freaking me out, Leo said, setting containers of Thai food on the coffee table. You haven't left the penthouse in 48 hours. You missed the call with the Portland group, and I'm pretty sure you've got a baby website open on your laptop. Victor closed the laptop. I'm handling something. The Rowan Blake situation. It wasn't a question. Leo had been with him long enough to fill in blanks without being told. You want to tell me what's actually going on? No. Are you in danger? No. Is she in danger? Victor hesitated. That was the question he'd been avoiding. Rowan and the twins lived in a building with broken security, and they had no protection beyond a chain lock and Rowan's instinct. Anyone looking to hurt Victor could do it easily by going after them. But telling Leo the truth meant bringing his world into theirs. It meant acknowledging that his children existed, which meant making them targets. "Not yet," Victor said carefully, "but that might change." Leo studied him with the kind of penetrating assessment that had made him invaluable over the years. "You're not talking about business, you're talking about family." "Maybe." "Jesus, Victor." Leo sat back and ran a hand through his hair. "Kids? Possibly." "How possibly?" "DNA test comes back tomorrow." Leo was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Okay, what do you need?" This was why Victor trusted him. No judgment, no unsolicited advice, just immediate pivot to logistics and solutions. "I don't know yet," Victor admitted, "but I'll tell you when I do." They ate in silence, both of them thinking through implications neither wanted to voice. Finally, Leo spoke. "For what it's worth, I think you'd be a good father. Better than you believe you would be." Victor looked at his friend, his right hand, his most trusted ally, and saw something in Leo's expression that looked almost like hope. "I left her," Victor said quietly. 3 years ago, I told her family made you weak, and I walked away. If these are my kids, I missed everything. First kicks, birth, 3 months of watching them grow. I threw that away because I was afraid. So don't be afraid now. It's not that simple. It never is." Leo stood, gathering the takeout containers. "But you've built an empire on making hard choices, Victor. This is just one more. Except this time, the stakes are people who might actually love you if you let them." He left before Victor could formulate a response. That night, Victor lay awake in his expensive bed and thought about what Rowan had said. Either you're in completely or you're out. There's no middle ground with children. He'd spent 15 years avoiding exactly this kind of all-in commitment. Every relationship had been carefully bounded. Every alliance had exit clauses. Every move had been calculated to preserve his freedom and minimize vulnerability. Now he was staring at a choice that offered no hedges and no escape routes. Either he became a father, really became one, with all the terrifying exposure and messy complications that entailed, or he walked away and lived the rest of his life knowing he'd abandoned his own children. When he finally fell asleep, Victor dreamed of a red light and a woman crossing the street with 2 infant carriers, except in the dream she kept walking and he couldn't catch up. The DNA results arrived by secure courier at 9 a.m. Victor sat at his kitchen island and stared at the envelope for 5 full minutes before opening it. His hands were steady, years of practice at maintaining composure under pressure, but his heart was hammering hard enough to make him dizzy. He pulled out the papers and scanned past the technical jargon to the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Jack and Lily Blake were his children. Victor set the papers down carefully and discovered his hands were shaking after all. He had children, a son and a daughter. 3 months old and perfect and completely unaware that their entire world was about to change. He called Rowan. She answered on the 3rd ring, slightly breathless. In the background, he could hear both babies crying in stereo. "It's me," Victor said. "The results came back. They're mine." "I know." Rowan's voice carried over the crying. "Hold on. I'm putting you on speaker so I can—" "Jack, sweetheart, I know. I'm trying. Do you need help?" The question was out before Victor could stop it. A pause. Then, "Can you be here in 20 minutes?" 15. He was already grabbing his keys. "I'll sit." Victor made it in 12 minutes and found Rowan's door propped open with a diaper bag. Inside, chaos reigned. Rowan sat on the floor with Lily screaming in her arms while Jack wailed from his bassinet. She was trying to warm a bottle one-handed while simultaneously attempting to bounce Lily into calm. Her hair was escaping its bun in wild strands, and there were what looked like tears of pure frustration on her cheeks. "They're both hungry, and I only have 2 hands, and the stupid bottle warmer is broken, and—" She looked up and saw Victor standing in the doorway. "Don't just stand there. Pick up Jack." Victor moved on instinct. He crossed to the bassinet and looked down at his son, whose face was red with rage and whose tiny fists were punching the air. Jack's eyes were squeezed shut, and his mouth was open in a wail that seemed impossibly loud for such a small person. "Pick him up," Rowan repeated, her voice strained. "Support his head. Like this?" She demonstrated with Lily, one hand under the baby's head, the other supporting her bottom. Victor reached into the bassinet and carefully, so carefully, lifted Jack. The baby was warm and surprisingly solid, heavier than Victor expected. Jack's crying didn't stop, but his eyes opened and fixed on Victor's face with an expression that looked almost like confusion. "Hi," Victor said, feeling completely ridiculous and utterly terrified. I'm your dad." Jack stared at him for 3 more seconds, then resumed screaming. "There are 2 bottles in the fridge," Rowan said, her voice tight with stress. "Warm one under hot water, not in the microwave, it makes hot spots. Test it on your wrist. If it's too hot, Jack won't drink it. If it's too cold, he'll refuse." Victor moved to the kitchenette with his son howling in his arms. He'd negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. He'd orchestrated operations across 3 states with military precision. Now he was standing in a tiny apartment trying to figure out how to warm a bottle of formula while a 3-month-old baby screamed directly into his ear. It was the most important thing he'd ever done. He got the temperature right on the second try, then carried Jack back to the rocking chair. Rowan was feeding Lily on the floor, having given up on the broken bottle warmer entirely. She glanced up at him. "Sit. Cradle him in your left arm. Yeah, like that. Tilt the bottle so the nipple stays full. If he sucks air, he'll get gas and then nobody sleeps." Victor followed her instructions with the focused intensity he usually reserved for high-stakes meetings. Jack latched onto the bottle immediately, and the crying stopped like someone had flipped a switch. Blessed silence fell over the apartment. "Thank you," Rowan said quietly. She sounded exhausted. "They usually don't sync up like this. I can normally handle them one at a time, but when they both melt down simultaneously, you shouldn't have to handle this alone. I've been managing." "That's not the same as having help." Rowan looked at him over Lily's head, and Victor saw something vulnerable flicker across her face before she shuddered it. "The test confirmed it," she said. "Not a question." "Yes. So now what?" It was the question Victor had been asking himself for 3 days. Now, sitting in a thrift store rocking chair with his infant son in his arms, he finally had an answer. "Now I learn to be their father," he said simply. Rowan's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back before they could fall. "It's not easy, Victor, and it doesn't stop. There's no clocking out, no breaks, no room for half measures or good intentions that don't follow through." "I know. Do you?" She shifted Lily to her shoulder, patting the baby's back with the automatic rhythm of someone who'd done this thousands of times. "Because the man I knew 3 years ago would have written a check and hired a nanny and called that fatherhood. I need to know if you're actually ready to do the work or if this is just guilt talking." Jack finished his bottle and Victor followed Rowan's earlier example, lifting him to his shoulder. The baby's warm weight settled against his chest, solid and trusting and terrifying. "I don't know if I'm ready," Victor admitted. "I don't know if I'll be any good at this. I don't know how to do any of this without screwing it up, but I know I want to try. And I know that if I walk away now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." It was more honesty than he'd offered anyone in years, maybe ever. Rowan studied him in silence, her gray eyes searching for cracks in his resolve. "Okay," she said finally. "Then you start tomorrow, 6 a.m. I'll teach you how to do a diaper change, how to burp them without getting spit up all over yourself, how to read their different cries. You show up every day for 2 weeks, and we'll see if you mean it." "Every day," Victor confirmed, "including weekends, including when it's hard, including when you have important meetings or better things to do." "Every day," he repeated. Rowan's expression softened just slightly. "Then I guess we're doing this." Jack burped against Victor's shoulder, a wet, messy sound followed by the warm spread of spit-up soaking through his expensive shirt. Rowan laughed, the sound startled and genuine. "Welcome to fatherhood," she said. "It's pretty much all downhill from here." But when Victor looked down at his son's peaceful face and felt the steady rise and fall of that tiny chest breathing against his, all he felt was the terrifying, exhilarating certainty that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't predict or control. And for the first time in 15 years, Victor Hale wasn't afraid of that. Victor showed up at 5:45 the next morning. Rowan answered the door in pajama pants and an old t-shirt, looking simultaneously unsurprised and mildly annoyed that he was early. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were shadows under her eyes that suggested sleep had been minimal. "You're eager," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "I didn't want to be late. 6 a.m. means 6 a.m., Victor, not 5:45. The twins are still asleep, and waking them early throws off the entire day's schedule." She closed the door and leaned against it, studying him. Rule 1. Respect their routine. Everything in their world runs on a schedule. Feedings, naps, bedtime. You mess with that schedule and everyone pays for it. Victor nodded, filing this information away with the same focus he brought to business briefings. Understood. Rowan crossed to the kitchenette and started preparing bottles with the efficient movements of someone who'd done this so many times she could do it blind. "You want coffee?" "Please." She poured him a cup from a machine that looked like it had survived several decades and handed it over without asking how he took it. "Black? No sugar?" She still remembered. The small intimacy of that knowledge settled awkwardly between them. "So how does this work?" Victor asked, wrapping his hands around the mug to give them something to do. "For the next 2 weeks, you shadow me. You watch everything I do, and then you do it yourself under supervision. Diaper changes, feeding, bathing, putting them down for naps, all of it." Rowan leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is going to be boring and gross and exhausting. There's no glory in infant care, no wins you can point to, just the same tasks over and over until you think you'll lose your mind. I can handle boring." "Can you?" Something sharp flickered in her eyes. "Because the Victor I knew needed stimulation, challenges, problems to solve. Babies aren't problems, Victor. They're just small humans who need consistent care. There's nothing to strategize, nothing to optimize. You just show up and do the work." A sound came from one of the bassinets, a small, querulous noise that was half whimper, half yawn. Rowan set down her coffee immediately and moved to Lily's side. "And it starts now," she said, lifting the baby. "Watch." Victor watched as Rowan changed Lily's diaper with quick, practiced movements. She talked through each step, checking for rash, wiping front to back, fastening the new diaper snug, but not tight. Lily fussed through the whole process, her tiny face scrunched in displeasure. "Your turn," Rowan said, handing him the baby. Victor accepted his daughter with the same care he'd use handling explosives. Lily was warm and squirmy, her legs kicking against his forearm. She stared up at him with dark blue eyes. They'd change color eventually, Rowan had mentioned yesterday, and made a sound that could have been curiosity or condemnation. "Hi, Lily," he said quietly. The baby farted. Rowan laughed. Actually laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the dim apartment. "Welcome to the glamorous world of parenting. Go ahead, change her." It took Victor 3 times as long as it had taken Rowan, and he fumbled the adhesive tabs twice, but he got the diaper on. Lily watched him the entire time with an expression of solemn judgment. "Not bad," Rowan admitted. "The diaper's a little crooked, but it'll hold. Now, Jack." They moved through the morning routine in careful tandem. Victor learned that Jack woke up happy but got angry fast if his needs weren't met immediately, while Lily was slower to wake but more patient once awake. He learned that the formula had to be exactly the right temperature or they'd refuse it. He learned that burping was an art form and that spit-up was inevitable no matter how careful you were. By 8 a.m., Victor's expensive shirt was ruined. His arms ached from holding babies in awkward positions, and he was pretty sure he'd gotten peed on at least once. He'd never felt more purposeful in his life. "You're doing okay?" Rowan said, settling onto the floor with both babies for tummy time. She positioned them on a colorful playmat, their tiny bodies propped on their forearms. "Better than I expected, honestly." Victor sat across from her, watching Jack try to lift his head. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Maybe that you'd show up once, realize how hard it is, and disappear." She adjusted Lily's position. "Or that you'd try to throw money at the problem instead of actually doing the work." "I meant what I said. I'm in." "For now." Rowan's voice was gentle but firm. "It's easy to be committed when it's new and interesting. Let's see how you feel in a week when nothing has changed except how tired you are." Jack started fussing, his face turning red with effort. Victor reached for him instinctively, then stopped and looked at Rowan for permission. Go ahead, she said. He's just frustrated. Tummy time is hard work when you're 3 months old. Victor picked up his son and was rewarded with immediate silence. Jack settled against his chest with a contented sigh, his tiny hand fisting in Victor's shirt. He likes you, Rowan observed, something complicated crossing her face. Is that surprising? A little. Babies usually have strong preferences. Jack's been wary of everyone except me and Mrs. Chen downstairs. She paused, then added quietly, Maybe he knows. The weight of that statement settled between them. Maybe Jack did know, on some instinctive level, that this man was his father. Or maybe Victor was just warm and solid and willing to hold him, which was all babies really needed. Either way, the trust implicit in that tiny fist gripping his shirt made Victor's chest tight. Tell me about the last 3 months, he said. I want to know what I missed. Rowan looked at him for a long moment, clearly weighing whether to open that door. Then she picked up Lily and settled back against the couch. They were born 6 weeks early, she began. I was grocery shopping and my water broke in the produce section. Mrs. Chen drove me to the hospital. Labor was fast, less than 4 hours. They were small but healthy, 4 pounds each. Victor's hands tightened on Jack. Were you scared? Terrified. I'd been reading all these books about what to expect, but nothing prepares you for actually holding them. They were so tiny, Victor. Their fingers were the size of matchsticks. The nurses had to show me how to feed them because they were too small to latch properly. She brushed her thumb over Lily's cheek, the gesture automatic and tender. The first week was a blur. I barely slept. I just sat next to their cribs in the hospital and watched them breathe because I was convinced something would go wrong. The nurses finally sent me home and told me to rest, but I couldn't. Every sound made me jump. Every cry sent me into panic mode. You got through it alone. I had help. Mrs. Chen brought food. The nurses at Family Bridges set up a meal train. My boss let me work from home indefinitely. Rowan met his eyes. I wasn't completely alone, I just didn't have you. The accusation hung in the air, quiet and devastating. I'm sorry, Victor said, and meant it. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry you had to do that by yourself. I'm sorry for all of it. Rowan's expression softened slightly. I know you are, but sorry doesn't change the past. It only matters if it changes the future. Jack made a small sound against Victor's chest. Not quite a cry, more like a question. Victor shifted him slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position, and the baby settled immediately. What else did I miss? He asked. So Rowan told him. She told him about the first time Lily smiled, a real smile, not just gas, at 6 weeks old. About how Jack had discovered his hands at 2 months and spent an entire day staring at them like they were the most fascinating thing in the universe. About the way Lily hiccuped after every feeding and how Jack only slept well when he was swaddled tight as a burrito. She told him about the hard parts, too. The night both babies had been sick and she'd called the pediatrician in tears at 3 a.m. The constant worry about money, about whether she was doing anything right, about whether her children would grow up resenting the choices she'd made. I keep wondering if I should have told you, she admitted. If maybe you had a right to know regardless of what you'd said about family. But then I remember how certain you were that night, how final, and I couldn't bear the thought of you looking at them like they were a mistake. Victor looked down at Jack's peaceful face. I was an idiot. You were afraid, Rowan corrected. There's a difference. Not much of one. She smiled slightly. No, not much. They sat in silence for a while, each holding a baby, the morning light filtering through the thin curtains and painting everything gold. It was the most domestic scene Victor had ever been part of, and it scared him almost as much as it felt right. Can I ask you something? Rowan said eventually. Anything. Why now? Why show up after 3 years? You could have kept driving that day. You could have convinced yourself you were seeing things or that it wasn't your problem. Why didn't you? It was a fair question. Victor tried to find an answer that was both honest and coherent. Because the second I saw you with them, I knew, he said slowly. Not logically, not as a deduction. I just knew, bone deep, that they were mine. And I realized that for 3 years I'd been telling myself I walked away to protect you, but that was a lie. I walked away because I was terrified of becoming my father. Your father loved your mother, Rowan said carefully. They talked about this once, years ago, in the dark safety of her old apartment. Loving people doesn't make you him. He loved her so much he made stupid choices trying to keep her safe. He took risks he shouldn't have, trusted people he shouldn't have. And when it all fell apart, he died and left her alone with a kid and nothing else. Victor's voice was rough. I swore I'd never put anyone in that position. Never give anyone that kind of power over my decisions. Never be weak like that. So you chose to be alone instead. I chose to be safe. And how's that working out for you? Victor looked at her, really looked at her. She was exhausted and broke and raising 2 babies in a studio apartment with broken heat, and she was still the strongest person he'd ever met. Not great, he admitted. Rowan's laugh was soft and sad. Yeah, I figured. Jack started fussing again, the small sounds escalating toward a full cry. Rowan glanced at the clock. Nap time. You want to try putting him down? Victor stood carefully, cradling Jack against his shoulder. Tell me what to do. Over the next hour, Rowan taught him the elaborate ritual of getting 2 babies to nap simultaneously. The white noise machine, the blackout curtains, the specific swaddle technique that Jack required, the gentle rocking motion that helped Lily settle, the careful placement in the bassinet so they didn't startle awake. It was meticulous and exhausting and required the kind of patience Victor usually reserved for high-stakes negotiations. When both babies were finally asleep, Victor and Rowan collapsed on opposite ends of the couch in mutual exhaustion. How long do they sleep? Victor asked. Anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. You never know. Rowan closed her eyes. This is the only break I get all day. Sometimes I just sit here in silence and try to remember what having a coherent thought feels like. Victor wanted to say something about how she shouldn't have to do this alone, about how he could help, about how he wanted to fix all of it. But Rowan had made her position clear. She didn't want his money or his solutions. She wanted his presence. So instead, he just sat with her in the silence of the sleeping apartment and tried to imagine doing this every day. The same routines, the same small tasks, the endless cycle of feed, change, comfort, sleep, repeat. Most people would find it mind-numbing. Victor found it strangely peaceful. I need to tell you something, he said after a while. Rowan opened her eyes. That sounds ominous. It's about my work, about the world I live in. Victor turned to face her. You know what I do. You've always known. And you know that people in my position have enemies. I've been careful. I've built protections. But if word gets out that I have children... He didn't need to finish. Rowan's face had already gone pale. They'd be targets, she said quietly. Yes. So what are you saying? That you can't be part of their lives because it's too dangerous? Because we've already had that conversation, Victor, and I'm not interested in having it again. No. I'm saying that if I'm going to be part of their lives, we need to do it carefully. Security, protocols, maybe eventually moving you somewhere safer. I'm not moving into your penthouse. I'm not asking you to. But this apartment, Rowan, the lock is broken. The neighborhood isn't safe. Anyone could what? Break in and kidnap them? Victor, normal people don't live with that kind of paranoia. We can't build our lives around worst-case scenarios that probably won't happen. They might happen if people know they're mine. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was steady but strained. So we're back to this. Back to family being a weakness, a liability. That's not what isn't it? She turned to face him fully. You're sitting here telling me that loving your children puts them in danger, that being their father makes them targets. How is that different from what you said 3 years ago? Because 3 years ago I walked away. Now I'm here trying to figure out how to keep them safe while still being in their lives. There's no guaranteed safety, Victor. Not for anyone. Every parent in the world lives with the knowledge that something could happen to their children. We don't let that fear stop us from loving them. It's different when the danger is real and specific. Is it? Or is that just another excuse to keep your distance? Her words hit harder because they were fair. Victor was trying to calculate angles and minimize risk, approaching fatherhood the same way he approached everything else in his life, as a problem to be solved through careful planning and strategic thinking. But children weren't a problem. They were just small humans who needed love and consistency and a father who showed up. "I don't know how to do this without my world touching theirs," he said finally. "I don't know how to be both things, the man I've been and the father they need." "Maybe you can't be both." Rowan's voice was gentle but uncompromising. "Maybe that's the choice you actually have to make." Before Victor could respond, Lily started crying. Then Jack joined in, the two of them syncing up like they'd planned it. Rowan stood immediately, moving toward the bassinets. "That was 20 minutes, she said. "Shortest nap of the day, which means they're going to be cranky until the next one." She picked up Lily and handed her to Victor, then lifted Jack. "Welcome to the afternoon shift." The conversation about safety and risk and impossible choices would have to wait. Right now, there were bottles to make and diapers to change and two tiny humans who didn't care about their father's criminal empire or their mother's justified wariness. They just needed to be fed and held and loved. So that's what Victor did. The days blurred into a rhythm that was simultaneously monotonous and overwhelming. Victor showed up every morning at 6 and stayed until the evening feeding, sometimes later if Rowan needed the extra help. He learned to change diapers in under a minute. He figured out that Jack preferred being held facing out so he could see the room, while Lily liked to be cradled close. He memorized the difference between their cries: hungry, tired, uncomfortable, bored. He also learned that his world and Rowan's existed in completely different realities. On the fourth day, Leo called with news about a shipment that had been intercepted by port authorities. It was a minor problem, easily solved, but it required Victor's attention. He'd been in the middle of feeding Jack when his phone rang. "I need to take this," he'd said, handing the bottle to Rowan. "Of course you do," she'd replied, her tone neutral but her eyes disappointed. Victor had stepped into the hallway and spent 20 minutes on the phone orchestrating a solution that involved bribes, misdirection, and calling in favors from a customs official who owed him. When he came back, both babies were asleep, and Rowan was washing bottles in silence. "I'm sorry," he'd said. "It was urgent." "It always is." "Rowan, I'm not mad, Victor. I'm just realistic. Your life doesn't stop because you decided to play dad for 2 weeks. Eventually, you'll have to choose which world you actually want to live in." She was right, and they both knew it. On the 7th day, Victor arrived to find Rowan's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, sitting with the twins while Rowan slept on the couch. The older woman looked him over with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd seen plenty of men make promises they didn't keep. "You the father?" she asked in accented English. "Yes." "You planning to stick around?" "Yes." "Good. She needs help. Too much for one person, 2 babies." Mrs. Chen handed him Lily. "You hold this one. I make soup." Victor spent the next 2 hours being supervised by a 70-year-old Chinese woman who didn't speak much English but communicated her expectations through pointed looks and strategic hand gestures. By the time Rowan woke up, he'd been taught 3 different methods for soothing a fussy baby and had received a comprehensive lecture, mostly in Mandarin, but the meaning was clear, about the responsibilities of fatherhood. "Mrs. Chen likes you," Rowan said, watching the older woman bustle around the kitchen. "That's rare. She thinks most men are useless." "What changed her mind?" "You showed up 7 days in a row. That's more than most guys manage." It was a low bar, but Victor would take it. On the 10th day, something shifted. Victor was changing Jack's diaper, a routine task he could now do without thinking, when the baby reached up and grabbed his finger. It wasn't the first time Jack had done this, but this time felt different. The baby's eyes locked on Victor's face with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so small. Then Jack smiled, not the reflexive, gas-induced smile that babies did accidentally. A real smile, wide and gummy, and directed straight at Victor. "Rowan," Victor said, his voice catching. "Rowan, look." She came over from where she'd been folding laundry and saw Jack's expression. Her own face softened. "That's his first real smile," she said quietly. "His first one ever." Victor stared at his son, this tiny person he'd known for less than 2 weeks, and felt something crack open in his chest. Jack kept smiling, oblivious to the magnitude of what he'd just done. "Hey, buddy," Victor whispered. "Hey, Jack!" The baby kicked his legs happily, still grinning. Rowan's hand found Victor's shoulder and squeezed gently. They stood like that for a long moment, both of them watching Jack experience what might have been joy or might have been gas, but felt like a miracle either way. "This is what you missed," Rowan said softly. "These little moments, they don't seem like much when they're happening, but they're everything." Victor understood. He'd built an empire on big moves and strategic victories, on deals that reshaped markets and operations that required months of planning. But this, a baby's first smile earned not through any skill or strategy, but just by showing up consistently, felt more important than anything he'd ever accomplished. "I don't want to miss any more," he said. Rowan was quiet for a long time. Then you need to decide what you're willing to give up to make that happen." That night, Victor sat in his penthouse and made a list. On one side, his empire, the power he'd built, the wealth he'd accumulated, the reputation that made people fear and respect him. 15 years of careful work, all of it contingent on maintaining his position through force, strategy, and ruthlessness. On the other side, 2 3-month-old babies who didn't care about any of that. A woman who'd loved him once and might learn to trust him again if he proved himself worthy. A chance at a life that didn't require constant vigilance and moral compromise. The choice should have been obvious, but walking away from his empire meant more than just giving up power. It meant leaving a vacuum that someone else would fill, someone potentially more violent, less controlled. It meant abandoning the people who depended on him, the operations that kept dozens of families fed, the delicate balance he'd maintained for years. It also meant vulnerability. The enemies he'd made wouldn't suddenly forget about him just because he retired. If anything, they'd see his exit as weakness, as an opportunity to settle old scores without fear of retaliation. Going legitimate meant painting a target on his back and on his children's backs without the resources to protect them properly. Unless he did it right. Victor opened his laptop and started making calls. Not to Leo, not yet. This had to be planned carefully, executed perfectly, with no loose ends or sudden moves that would trigger suspicion. He had to find a way to walk away from his empire without it collapsing into violence. Had to transfer power smoothly enough that his enemies saw strength, not weakness. Had to build legitimate protections for Rowan and the twins that didn't depend on his criminal network. It was the most complex operation he'd ever planned, and the stakes had never been higher. But as Victor worked through the night, building a strategy to dismantle everything he'd built, he thought about Jack's smile, about Lily's tiny hand gripping his finger, about Rowan's quiet strength and the life they could have if he was brave enough to choose it. For the first time in 15 years, Victor Hale knew exactly what he wanted. Now he just had to figure out how to survive getting it. The 2 weeks ended on a Tuesday. Victor showed up at 6 a.m. as he had every day, but this time Rowan was waiting for him with coffee already poured and both babies fed and content in their swings. She'd showered and put on actual clothes instead of pajamas, jeans and a sweater that made her look less exhausted and more like the woman he remembered. "So," she said, handing him the coffee, "you made it. Did you think I wouldn't?" "Honestly, I gave you 50-50 odds of making it past day 5. She settled onto the couch, tucking her legs under her. "But you showed up every single day, even when you were clearly exhausted. Even when you had that conference call that made you look like you wanted to put your fist through a wall." Victor sat in the rocking chair, cradling his coffee. "I told you I was in." "You did, and I'm starting to believe you might mean it." Rowan watched him carefully. "So what happens now?" It was the question Victor had been preparing for all week. He'd run scenarios, consulted with lawyers who specialized in family law, and drafted proposals that tried to balance what he wanted with what was realistic. But sitting here in Rowan's tiny apartment with his children cooing softly in their swings, all his careful planning felt inadequate. "I want to be part of their lives," he said simply. "Really part of it. Not just weekends or holidays. I want them to know me, to know I chose them." "Okay, what does that look like practically?" "I was thinking I could take them a few days a week, give you a break, help with expenses. Maybe eventually we could work out something more formal." "Victor," Rowan's voice was gentle but firm. "Stop trying to negotiate. This isn't a business deal. These are our children. Either you're their father or you're not. There's no custody arrangement that makes you half a parent." "Then what do you want from me?" She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers worrying at the edge of her sweater. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "I want you to be honest about what you can actually give, not what you think you should give, or what sounds good. I need to know if you're planning to stay in Seattle, if you're going to keep doing what you do, or if you're serious about going legitimate. If you can handle the reality that being a father means sometimes your children come first, even when it's inconvenient or costly or dangerous. I'm working on going legitimate, Victor said. It's complicated. I can't just walk away without causing chaos, but I'm putting pieces in place. How long? 6 months, maybe a year. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something sad flickered in her eyes. And in the meantime? In the meantime, I keep showing up. I help however I can. I prove that I'm serious, while still running an empire built on things that could get you killed or arrested. Yes? She stood and crossed to the window, staring out at the gray Seattle morning. I want to believe you, Victor. I want to believe this is real and you're going to follow through. But I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the crisis that makes you choose your old life over this one. That won't happen. You don't know that. You can't know that. She turned to face him. 3 years ago, you chose your empire over me. You looked me in the eye and told me family was a weakness you couldn't afford. Why should I believe you've changed? It was a fair question, and Victor didn't have a good answer beyond the obvious. Because he had changed. Jack's smile had changed him. Watching Rowan struggle alone had changed him. The realization that he'd wasted 3 years being afraid of the only thing worth having had changed him. But words were cheap. Rowan needed proof, and proof took time. You shouldn't believe me, Victor said finally. Not yet, but give me the chance to prove it. Let me keep showing up. Let me be their father for real, not just in theory. And if I fail, if I choose wrong or disappear, or prove I'm the same man I was 3 years ago, then you have every right to cut me out completely. Rowan studied him with an expression he couldn't read. You're asking me to take a leap of faith. I'm asking you to give me time to earn your trust. And if you can't, if 6 months from now you're still running the same operations and making the same choices, then I'll have to accept that I'm not capable of being the father they deserve. The words hurt to say, but they were true. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think I'm capable of more than I've let myself be. I just need the chance to prove it. Lily started fussing in her swing, the sound escalating quickly toward a full cry. Rowan moved to pick her up, but Victor stood first. Let me, he said. He lifted Lily and settled her against his shoulder, swaying gently the way Rowan had taught him. The baby quieted almost immediately, her small body relaxing into his hold. Victor breathed in that particular baby smell, milk and soap and something indefinably sweet, and felt the same overwhelming surge of protectiveness he'd been feeling for 2 weeks straight. I love them, he said quietly. I know I barely know them. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I look at them and I feel like my chest is going to crack open. Like every decision I've made for 15 years was just killing time until I got here. Rowan's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I know. I felt that way the second they were born, like my whole life had just been a prologue. Then let me write the next chapter with you, not as someone who swoops in to save the day or fix everything with money, just as their father, as someone who shows up and does the work and loves them enough to change. She crossed to him and placed her hand on his arm, her touch light but grounding. Okay, but we do this my way. You don't get to make unilateral decisions about their lives. You don't get to override me because you think you know better. And the second I think they're in danger because of your world, we're done. Do you understand? Yes. I'm serious, Victor. I won't let them grow up afraid. I won't let them become collateral damage in whatever wars you're fighting. If you can't walk away from that life, then you can't be part of theirs. I understand, and I'm going to walk away. I just need time to do it right. Rowan searched his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, then we try this. For real. The relief that flooded through Victor was so intense it made him dizzy. He'd negotiated deals worth millions, faced down dangerous people without flinching, built an empire from nothing. But getting Rowan to say yes to letting him be a father felt like the biggest victory of his life. Jack made a sound from his swing, not quite a cry, more like a demand for attention. Rowan laughed and went to pick him up. Your son is not a fan of being ignored, she said, settling Jack against her hip. He's going to be trouble when he's older. He gets that from you. Please, he gets that from you. Have you looked in a mirror? You have the same expression he makes when he's not getting what he wants. Victor looked at his son's scrunched, indignant face and had to admit she might be right. Fair point. They spent the rest of the morning falling into the rhythm they'd developed over 2 weeks, changing, feeding, playing, napping. But this time it felt different, less like a trial period and more like a foundation, like they were building something that might actually last. Around noon, Victor's phone rang. Leo's name flashed on the screen. He almost ignored it, but Rowan saw his hesitation and made a shooing motion. Take it. They're both asleep. I'm going to actually take a shower that lasts more than 3 minutes. Victor stepped into the hallway and answered. What is it? We have a problem. Leo's voice was tight with tension. Marcus Chen is asking questions about you, specifically about whether you've gone soft. Marcus Chen ran the Chinatown operations. Gambling, some light trafficking, protection rackets that stayed just under federal radar. He was ambitious and ruthless, and he'd been testing boundaries for months. Victor had shut him down each time, but gently, with the kind of measured response that maintained order without escalating to violence. Apparently, that restraint was being interpreted as weakness. What kind of questions? Victor asked. Whether you're distracted, whether you're losing your edge, whether it might be time for new leadership. Leo paused. He's also been making inquiries about your personal life, about whether you've been spending time in Rainier Valley. Ice slid down Victor's spine. How specific? Not specific enough to be actionable yet, but he's fishing, and if he finds out about Rowan and the twins, he won't. Victor, you've been showing up at that apartment every day for 2 weeks. Someone's going to notice. Someone's probably already noticed. Victor leaned against the hallway wall, his mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. Marcus was smart and patient. If he knew about the twins, he'd use them as leverage. Not violently, Marcus preferred psychological warfare to physical force, but he'd find a way to apply pressure. I need you to handle Marcus, Victor said. Remind him why challenging me is a bad idea. Do it quietly, but make it clear. What are you planning to do? I'm going to move Rowan and the twins somewhere safer, today. She's going to fight you on that. I know, but I'm not giving her a choice. Not on this. Victor ended the call and went back inside to find Rowan emerging from the bathroom with wet hair and a suspicious expression. That sounded serious, she said. We need to talk. He told her everything. About Marcus Chen, about the questions being asked, about the very real possibility that his world was about to crash into theirs in ways that couldn't be controlled or contained. Rowan listened in silence, her face growing paler with each sentence. When he finished, she sat down heavily on the couch. So it's starting, she said quietly. The danger you warned me about. Yes, which is why I need you to let me move you somewhere safe. A better apartment, better security. Somewhere Marcus can't find you. You want to hide us. I want to protect you. By putting us in a cage. Rowan's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. By making us prisoners of your choices. That's not what this is, isn't it? She stood, pacing the small space. You're asking me to upend our lives because you made enemies. To live in fear because you chose a world where people use children as leverage. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Victor. This is why I left 3 years ago. I know, and I'm trying to fix it. But right now, the most important thing is keeping you and the twins safe while I sort this out. And how long will that take? How long do we have to hide? I don't know. A few weeks. Maybe longer. Rowan laughed, the sound brittle and close to breaking. I have a job, Victor. I have a life. I can't just disappear because one of your associates is feeling ambitious. Your job can wait. Your life can wait. Their safety can't. Don't you dare tell me what can wait when it comes to my children. Her voice cracked. I've been keeping them safe for 3 months without your help. I think I can manage a few more weeks. Rowan, please. No, I'm not running. I'm not hiding. And I'm not letting you make these decisions unilaterally like I'm some helpless damsel who needs rescuing. Victor crossed to her, gripping her shoulders gently. This isn't about control. This is about the fact that Marcus Chen is a dangerous man, and if he finds out about Jack and Lily, he will use them against me. I can't let that happen. Tears were streaming down Rowan's face now, but her voice stayed strong. Then maybe you need to walk away. Maybe you need to choose right now whether you're going to be their father or whether you're going to keep living a life that puts them in danger. I'm choosing them. That's what this is. I'm choosing to protect them the only way I know how. By forcing us into hiding? By making us live like fugitives? That's not protection, Victor. That's just another form of abandonment. The words hit like a physical blow. Victor dropped his hands and stepped back, trying to find an argument that would make her understand. But looking at Rowan's tear-stained face and the sleeping babies beyond her, he realized she was right. He was trying to solve this the way he solved everything, through control, strategy, and force of will. But you couldn't strategize your way into being a good father. You couldn't control the chaos of loving people. You could only show up and do the hard work of choosing them over and over, even when the choice was terrifying. "Tell me what you want me to do," he said quietly. "Tell me how to keep you safe in a way that doesn't feel like imprisonment." Rowan wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "I want you to handle your problem. I want you to make it clear that we're off limits without broadcasting that we exist. And I want you to start the process of walking away from your empire for real, not in some theoretical future, but now, today. That's going to take time. Then start today. Make one move toward legitimate, one real step that proves you're serious." Victor thought about the plans he'd been making in secret, the shell companies he'd been setting up, the legitimate investments he'd been researching. He'd been moving carefully, trying not to show his hand too soon. But Rowan was right. Careful and slow wouldn't protect his family. Decisive action would. "Okay," he said, "I'll start today. But in the meantime, I'm hiring security. Not to trap you or control you, just someone who can watch the building. Make sure no one's asking questions or hanging around. You won't even know they're there." Rowan considered this, clearly weighing her options. "Fine. But the second it feels like surveillance instead of protection, it stops. Understood?" "Understood." She crossed to the bassinets and looked down at the sleeping twins, her expression soft and fierce all at once. "I won't let them grow up afraid, Victor. I won't let your world steal their childhood. If you can't figure out how to give us a normal life, then this doesn't work, no matter how much you love them or how hard you try." "I know." "Do you? Because I need you to really understand what you're asking of me. You're asking me to trust you with the two most important people in my life. To believe that you'll choose us when it gets hard. To have faith that you're capable of being someone you've never been before." Her voice broke. "That's a lot to ask, Victor." "I know it is. And I'm going to prove I'm worth it." He wanted to cross to her, to hold her and promise everything would be okay. But the distance between them felt uncrossable in that moment. Too much history, too much fear, too much at stake. Instead, Victor pulled out his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Leo. "I need a security detail on Rowan's building. Subtle. Just eyes and ears. Nobody makes a move without running it by me first." The second was to Marcus Chen. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring, his voice smooth and vaguely amused. "Victor Hale, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I heard you've been asking questions about me," Victor said, his tone conversational. "About whether I'm losing my edge." "Just curious. You've been less visible lately. People notice these things." "Here's what I want you to notice, Marcus. I'm consolidating, streamlining operations, making moves that are going to reshape how this city works. You can either be part of that future or you can keep testing boundaries and find out why no one successfully challenged me in 15 years. A pause. "Is that a threat?" "It's a clarification. I'm not distracted. I'm not weak. I'm just selective about where I invest my energy. And right now I'm invested in making sure everyone understands that certain areas of my life are completely off limits." "Such as?" "My personal business, where I spend my time, who I spend it with. Those topics are closed, permanently. Anyone who keeps digging is going to find themselves facing consequences they won't enjoy." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, less amused, more wary. "Understood. I appreciate the clarification." "Good. Then we won't need to have this conversation again." Victor ended the call and found Rowan watching him with an unreadable expression. "You just threatened him," she said. "I set a boundary." "With menace." "It's the only language Marcus understands." Victor pocketed his phone. He'll back off now, and word will spread that my personal life is off limits. It buys us time. Time for what? Time for me to dismantle my empire without it collapsing into chaos. Time for me to build something legitimate that can support us. Time for you to decide if you can actually trust me. Rowan crossed her arms, still maintaining that careful distance. And if I can't? If 6 months from now nothing has changed? Then I'll accept that I failed. And I'll step back from their lives because that's what's best for them. Victor met her eyes, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think I'm going to prove to you that I'm capable of being the man you needed 3 years ago. The man they deserve now. Jack stirred in his bassinet, making small sounds that meant he'd be fully awake and demanding attention in about 30 seconds. Rowan moved to pick him up, and Victor watched as she settled their son against her shoulder with the automatic grace of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. I want to believe you, she said softly. I want to believe this is real, and you're going to follow through. But I've been disappointed before, Victor. I can't go through that again, and I can't let them go through it either. You won't have to, I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not. Lily woke then, her cry piercing and immediate. Victor went to her without thinking, lifting her and settling into the familiar swaying motion that usually calmed her. The baby's cries softened, but didn't stop entirely. She was working up to a full meltdown. She's hungry, Rowan said, already moving toward the kitchen. Can you hold her while I make a bottle? Of course. They moved through the feeding routine with the practice coordination they'd developed over 2 weeks. Victor held Lily while Rowan prepared the bottle, then they switched so he could feed her while Rowan dealt with Jack. It was domestic and ordinary, and exactly what Victor had spent 15 years convincing himself he didn't want. Now he couldn't imagine wanting anything else. When both babies were fed and content, Victor checked his watch. It was nearly 3 p.m. He'd been there for 9 hours. Normally, he would have left by now to handle evening business, calls to make, operations to oversee, the endless logistics of running an empire. Instead, he pulled out his phone and texted Leo. Clear my schedule for the rest of the day. I'll check in tomorrow morning. Leo's response was immediate. Everything okay? Better than okay. Just handle it. Victor set his phone aside and looked at Rowan. What do you normally do at this time of day? Try to survive until bedtime while praying they both nap at the same time. But can I stay? Help with the evening routine? She studied him carefully, clearly weighing whether to let him further into their lives. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, but you're doing bath time. Both of them. And I'm not helping when they start screaming. Deal. Bath time turned out to be exactly as chaotic as advertised. Jack hated the water and screamed like Victor was torturing him. Lily loved the water and splashed enthusiastically, soaking everything within a 3-foot radius. By the time both babies were clean and dressed in pajamas, Victor was drenched and exhausted. You look like you went swimming in your clothes, Rowan observed, failing to hide her smile. Your daughter has a future in water sports. She gets that from you. You were always intense about everything. Was I? Rowan's smile faded slightly. You don't remember the way you threw yourself into every project, every problem, every relationship like it was the only thing that mattered? Until you decided it didn't matter anymore and moved on to the next thing? The accusation was gentle but clear. Victor had a history of intensity without staying power, of burning bright and burning out. I'm not moving on from this, he said quietly. Not from them. Not from you. Not from me. Rowan's voice was careful. Victor, we're not… this isn't about us. This is about Jack and Lily. I know, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope it could be about more than that. Eventually. She looked away, her fingers worrying at the edge of Jack's pajama shirt. Let's just focus on you being their father right now. Everything else is too complicated. It was a gentle rebuff, but it still stung. Victor had hoped that these 2 weeks had shown Rowan he'd changed, that maybe the love they'd once had could be rebuilt. But she was right. They needed to focus on the twins first. Everything else could wait, if there was ever going to be an everything else. They put the babies down for the night together, moving through the elaborate bedtime routine that Rowan had perfected. White noise machines, blackout curtains, the specific swaddle technique each baby preferred. By the time both twins were asleep, it was nearly 8 p.m., and Rowan looked ready to collapse. You should go, she said, settling onto the couch with visible exhaustion. Get some rest. Come back tomorrow if you want. If I want? Victor sat in the rocking chair. Rowan, I want to be here every day, not just when it's convenient or when you need an extra set of hands. I want this to be my life. Your life is a penthouse downtown and an empire that requires constant attention. This, she gestured at the tiny apartment, is mine. They're not the same thing. They could be. How? You going to give up your penthouse and move into a studio in Rainier Valley? If that's what it takes. Rowan laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't mean that. You're caught up in the novelty of fatherhood right now, the challenge of it. But once the reality sets in, once you realize how boring and repetitive and unglamorous it actually is, you'll go back to your old life. That's what people like you do. People like me. People who are used to power and control and constant stimulation. People who've never had to subordinate their own needs to someone else's. People who've built their entire identity around being untouchable. She wasn't wrong. 3 years ago, that was exactly who Victor had been. But sitting in this apartment with spit up on his shirt and exhaustion in his bones, he realized he didn't want to be that person anymore. You're right, he said. That's who I was. But people change, Rowan. Sometimes they change because they want to. Sometimes they change because they have to. And sometimes they change because they finally understand what they've been missing. And what have you been missing? This, you, them. A life that means something beyond money and power and reputation. Victor leaned forward. I built an empire because I thought that's what strength looked like. Turns out, I was just afraid of being vulnerable. Afraid of loving something more than I loved control. Rowan's eyes were bright with unshed tears again. I want to believe you, but I'm so scared, Victor. I'm scared you're going to get bored or scared or overwhelmed. I'm scared Marcus Chen or someone like him is going to find out about the twins and use them against you. I'm scared I'm making a mistake letting you in. You're not making a mistake. How can you be sure? Because I've never wanted anything the way I want this, and I've never been willing to give up everything to get it. He stood and crossed to the door, giving her space to process. I'll be back tomorrow, 6 a.m., and every day after that until you believe me. Rowan didn't respond, but as Victor left, he thought he saw something shift in her expression. Not quite trust, not quite hope, but maybe the beginning of both. The hallway was dark and quiet. Victor took the stairs slowly, his mind already working through the logistics of what came next. He needed to accelerate his exit plan, needed to make moves that proved to Rowan he was serious about going legitimate, needed to protect his family without suffocating them. It was the most important operation of his life, and failure wasn't an option. His phone buzzed as he reached the street. A text from Leo. Security detail in place, 2 teams, 8-hour shifts. Nobody gets close without us knowing. Victor texted back. Good. Now start making calls. I want a meeting with every major player in the city. 2 weeks from now. Time to make my exit official. Leo's response took longer this time. You're sure about this? Victor looked up at the 4th floor windows where his children were sleeping and their mother was probably crying in the shower because she was exhausted and scared and trying so hard to believe he wouldn't disappoint her again. I've never been more sure of anything, he typed back. Then he got in his car and drove back to his penthouse to start dismantling the empire he'd spent 15 years building. Because Rowan was right. He couldn't be both things. He couldn't be the ruthless kingpin who ruled through fear and the father who showed up for diaper changes and midnight feedings. He had to choose. And for the first time in his life, Victor Hale knew exactly which choice he was going to make. The meeting took place 3 weeks later in a private room at a downtown restaurant Victor owned through a series of shell companies. 13 men sat around the table, the major players who controlled Seattle's underground economy. Drug distribution, gambling operations, protection rackets, money laundering. Between them, they generated roughly $200 million annually in revenue that never appeared on any tax form. Victor had built most of it, or at least organized it into something functional. Now he was about to tear it apart. Leo stood behind him, silent and watchful. They'd spent the last 3 weeks preparing for this moment, moving pieces carefully, building contingencies for every possible reaction. This was the most dangerous play Victor had ever made. And the only way it worked was if he showed absolute confidence. Marcus Chen sat directly across from him, his expression neutral but his eyes calculating. To his left was Tommy Nguyen, who ran the gambling operations in the International District. On Victor's right was James Wright, an ex-cop who'd gone private and now controlled most of the city's gray market security business. These were dangerous men, smart men who'd survived in a world where weakness got you killed, and Victor was about to tell them he was walking away. "Thank you for coming," Victor said, his voice carrying the easy authority he'd cultivated over 15 years. "I know you're all busy, so I'll get straight to the point. I'm retiring." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus recovered first, his smile sharp and knowing. "Retiring. That's an interesting word choice. Most people in our line of work retire horizontally." A few uncomfortable laughs rippled around the table. Victor didn't smile. "I'm transitioning my operations to legitimate business," he continued. "Real estate development, private security consulting, investment management, all above board, all legal. And I'm transferring control of my current holdings to interested parties who can maintain stability." "Why?" Tommy Nguyen asked bluntly. "You built this. You run it better than anyone could. Why walk away?" "Personal reasons." "Personal reasons don't retire men like you," Marcus said. "Personal reasons usually come in the form of federal indictments or threats we can't ignore. So which is it, Victor? Are you running from something or toward something?" Victor met Marcus's gaze steadily. "I'm choosing a different life, one that doesn't require looking over my shoulder or wondering which associate is planning to take my place, one that lets me sleep at night." "You're going soft," Marcus said, not quite an accusation, but close. "I'm going smart. There's a difference." Now James Wright leaned forward. "What happens to your territories? Your operations? You can't just leave a vacuum, Victor. Someone's going to fill it, and if you're not controlling that process, it's going to get bloody." "That's why we're here. I'm offering each of you a piece of what I built. Structured transitions, clean handovers, no territory wars, no power struggles. You take what makes sense for your existing operations, and we all walk away wealthier and safer than we are now." "And if we don't want pieces?" Marcus asked. "If we want the whole thing?" The threat was subtle but clear. Victor had expected it. "Then you'll be fighting everyone else in this room," Victor said calmly. "And while you're tearing each other apart, the vacuum you're so worried about will collapse into exactly the kind of chaos that brings federal attention." "Is that really what you want?" Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've thought this through. I always do." For the next 2 hours, they negotiated. Who got which operations, how the transitions would work, what safeguards were in place to prevent anyone from getting greedy. Victor had spent 3 weeks building this framework with Leo's help, and he presented it now with the same clinical precision he brought to every major deal. The key was making everyone feel like they were getting a win. Marcus got expanded control in Chinatown and a piece of the money laundering operation he'd been eyeing for years. Tommy got the gambling network he'd helped build. James got security contracts and connections that would legitimize his business overnight. By the time they finished, everyone at the table was wealthier on paper than they'd been when they arrived. And Victor was effectively out. "There's one more thing," Victor said as the meeting wound down. "Anyone who comes after me or my interests after this transition is complete will face consequences from everyone in this room. That's the deal. We all protect each other's exits." "Your interests," Marcus repeated. "You mean your family?" The word hung in the air like a bomb. Victor kept his expression neutral. "I mean anything that's mine. Family, property, investments. All of it is off limits. That's non-negotiable." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood. You've been fair with all of us, Victor. We can extend the same courtesy." It wasn't quite trust, but it was as close as men like them got. Victor stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Pleasure doing business with all of you. Leo will handle the logistics of the transitions. Expect everything to be finalized within 6 months." They filed out one by one, some stopping to shake Victor's hand, others just nodding in acknowledgement. When the room was finally empty except for Leo, Victor allowed himself to exhale. "That went better than expected," Leo said quietly. "Marcus is going to test the boundaries. Probably within a month." "I know. I'll keep eyes on him." Victor loosened his tie, suddenly exhausted. "Make sure the security detail on Rowan's building gets doubled, and I want daily reports on any unusual activity in her neighborhood." "Already done." Leo paused. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. You think I'm insane. Both can be true. Leo's expression softened. But I've known you for 12 years, Victor. I've never seen you care about anything the way you care about those kids. If walking away from all this is what it takes to keep them safe, then it's the right move. Tell me that in 6 months when this all falls apart. It's not going to fall apart. You built something too valuable to destroy. Marcus and the others know that. They'll maintain it because it's in their best interest. Victor wanted to believe that. But he'd been in this world long enough to know that self-interest was a fickle motivator. The second someone saw an advantage in chaos, the carefully constructed peace would shatter, which meant he needed to move faster. Over the next month, Victor accelerated everything. He created legitimate companies to absorb his assets. He hired lawyers to clean up his holdings. He moved money through so many channels, it would take federal investigators years to trace it. And every morning at 6 a.m., he showed up at Rowan's apartment to change diapers and feed babies and prove he was serious about being a father. Rowan was warming to him, slowly. She let him stay later, trusted him with more complex tasks, started asking his opinion instead of just giving orders. They were building something that resembled partnership, even if it was still fragile and conditional. The twins were growing fast. Jack had started rolling over, much to Rowan's delight and terror. Lily had discovered her voice and used it constantly, babbling in long streams of nonsense that sounded almost like conversation. Victor spent his evenings researching developmental milestones and reading books about early childhood, determined not to miss anything else. His old life was fading. The penthouse felt empty. The late-night calls felt pointless. The constant calculations about power and leverage felt exhausting, rather than energizing. He was changing, and he wasn't entirely sure he recognized the man he was becoming, but he liked him better. Then everything went wrong on a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn. Victor was at Rowan's apartment, feeding Jack while Rowan put Lily down for a nap, when his phone buzzed with a text from Leo. "We have a situation. Marcus made a move. Call me immediately." Victor's blood went cold. He handed Jack to Rowan without explanation and stepped into the hallway. "What happened?" he asked when Leo answered. "Marcus sent people to your storage facility in Georgetown, the one where you kept the contingency cash and the files on everyone. They broke in 2 hours ago and cleaned it out. The security team called the police and filed a report like normal citizens, which is what you told them to do in case of an actual break-in. They didn't know it was Marcus." Victor closed his eyes and forced himself to think through the implications. The cash was significant, but not catastrophic. Maybe $2 million, which he could afford to lose. But the files were different. Those files contained leverage on every major player in the city, including Marcus. Evidence of crimes, financial records, personal secrets. With those files, Marcus could consolidate power faster than anyone expected, could eliminate rivals, build alliances, and take over everything Victor had just walked away from. Or he could use them to hurt Victor directly. "Does he know about Rowan?" Victor asked quietly. "I don't think so, but if he goes through those files carefully enough, he might find references. You were thorough about compartmentalizing, but there are always threads." Victor's mind raced through options. He could confront Marcus directly, but that would likely escalate to violence. He could try to negotiate, but Marcus clearly felt bold enough to make this move. He could go to the police, but that would expose his own crimes. Or he could do what he should have done a month ago, get Rowan and the twins out of Seattle entirely. "I need a secure location," Victor said. "Somewhere outside the city. Somewhere Marcus can't trace." "I know a place. Private estate up near the San Juans, owned by a client who owes me. It's isolated, secure, and completely off the books." Set it up. I'm moving them tonight." "Victor, if you run, Marcus is going to see it as weakness. He'll push harder." "I don't care what Marcus sees. I care about keeping my family safe." He ended the call and went back inside to find Rowan staring at him with an expression that said she'd heard enough to know something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked. Victor told her everything, about Marcus, about the files, about the very real possibility that their location was about to be compromised. Rowan's face went white. "You said this wouldn't happen. You said you'd handled it." "I thought I had. Marcus moved faster than I expected." "So what now? We run? We hide? We spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders because you couldn't fully let go of your old world?" "Rowan, no." Her voice was shaking. You promised me. You promised you'd keep us safe. You promised this was worth it. It is worth it, which is why I need you to pack a bag right now and come with me. There's a safe house north of the city. We'll stay there until I can neutralize the threat. Neutralize the threat. Listen to yourself, Victor. You're talking about our lives like they're a business problem to solve. I'm trying to protect you. By making us fugitives? By proving that everything I was afraid of 3 years ago was completely justified? Tears were streaming down her face now. I can't do this. I can't live like this. And I won't let Jack and Lily grow up in this world. Victor crossed to her, gripping her shoulders gently. Then trust me one more time. Give me a week to fix this. 1 week, and then we can have a normal life. I promise. You can't promise that. You can't control what Marcus does or what anyone else does. All you can do is make choices. And right now you're choosing the same thing you always choose. Control over connection. Safety over trust. That's not fair, isn't it? Rowan pulled away from him. I've been watching you for a month, Victor. You show up every morning and you do the work and you say all the right things. But you're still operating like a man who runs an empire. You're still making unilateral decisions. You're still trying to manage and manipulate and control every variable. Because that's how I keep you safe. No. That's how you keep yourself from being vulnerable. That's how you maintain the illusion that you're in control of everything when the truth is you're not in control of anything. Not really. She was crying in earnest now, her whole body shaking. Jack started fussing in his swing, picking up on the tension. Lily woke in her bassinet with a sharp cry, and Victor stood there, watching his family fall apart, and realized Rowan was absolutely right. He'd spent a month trying to prove he'd changed, but he hadn't changed at all. He was still the same man who'd walked away 3 years ago, just with different justifications. He was still choosing his way of doing things over actually listening to what Rowan needed. He was still putting control ahead of connection. Tell me what you need, he said quietly. Not what you think I want to hear, not what's practical or strategic. Just tell me what you actually need from me right now. Rowan picked up Jack, settling him against her shoulder. I need you to choose us, really choose us. Not as a problem to solve or people to protect, as the center of your life, as more important than your empire or your reputation or your need to control everything. I'm trying. I know you're trying. But trying isn't enough anymore, Victor. I need you to actually do it. I need you to walk away from Marcus and the files and all of it. I need you to call the police and report the break-in and let the system handle it like a normal person would. That's not how this world works. Then leave that world behind completely, right now. Her voice broke. Stop hedging. Stop keeping 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Either you're in this life with us or you're not. But I won't watch you try to live in both anymore. She was asking him to do the one thing he'd never done. Let go completely. Give up control. Trust that the pieces would fall where they needed to fall without his hand guiding them. It terrified him. But looking at Rowan holding their son, at Lily crying in her bassinet, at the life he wanted more than anything he'd ever wanted, Victor realized terror was just another feeling he'd have to learn to sit with. Okay, he said. Okay, what? Okay, I'll call the police. I'll report the break-in. I'll let Marcus have the files and the money and whatever else he thinks he won, and I'll stay here with you and trust that we'll figure out the rest together. Rowan stared at him. You're serious? Yes. But Marcus could use those files against you, against us. Maybe, but hiding and running and trying to control every variable hasn't kept us safe. It's just kept us afraid. Victor crossed to Lily's bassinet and picked her up, settling her against his chest. She quieted immediately, her small hand fisting in his shirt. You were right. I've been trying to live in both worlds. Trying to be a father while still thinking like a kingpin. It's not working. So you're just going to let it all go? Just like that? Just like that. He met her eyes. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing them. I'm choosing a life where we don't have to hide or run or constantly look over our shoulders. If that means taking the risk that Marcus might come after me, then that's the risk I'm taking. Rowan set Jack in his swing and crossed to Victor, placing her hand on his arm. Victor, placing her hand on Tepmotep. And if he does come after you, if those files contain something that could destroy everything, then we'll deal with it together, as a family, as partners, not with me making all the decisions and you just going along with them. You really mean that? I really mean it." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for cracks in his resolve. Then slowly, carefully, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his shoulder. "Okay," she whispered. "Then we try it your way. We call the police. We let the system work. And we trust that being together is worth more than being perfectly safe." Victor wrapped his free arm around her, holding both Rowan and Lily close. Jack made a happy sound from his swing, oblivious to the fact that his father had just made the biggest gamble of his life. They called the police together, filed a report about the break-in, gave statements that were technically true if incomplete. The officers who responded were professional and sympathetic, and completely unaware that the storage facility belonged to one of Seattle's most successful criminals. When they left, Rowan made coffee, and they sat on the couch while the twins played on their mat. "Now what?" she asked. "Now we wait and see if Marcus makes a move. And if he does, we deal with it without running." "You're not worried?" "I'm terrified, but I'm more terrified of losing this than I am of whatever Marcus might do." Rowan reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact since he'd come back into her life, and the simple intimacy of it made Victor's chest tight. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "But I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're doing this together." They sat in silence for a while, watching their children explore the world with the fearless curiosity of people who didn't know yet how dangerous it could be. Victor thought about the life he'd built, the empire, the power, the reputation. All of it had been constructed to protect himself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. And now he was choosing the vulnerability anyway. The call came 3 days later. Victor was giving Jack a bottle when his phone rang. Marcus Chen's name flashed on the screen. Rowan looked up from where she was changing Lily's diaper, her eyes questioning. "Put it on speaker," she said. Victor did. "Marcus." "Victor, we need to talk." "I'm listening." "I have some interesting files here. Very interesting, and I'm trying to decide what to do with them." Victor's hand tightened on the phone, but he kept his voice steady. "What do you want?" "I want to know if you're really out, if this retirement is genuine, or if you're just lying low until you can come back and reclaim everything." "I'm out, completely. You can have all of it." "Even knowing I could use these files to destroy you, to expose everything you've built, to make sure you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder?" "Even knowing that." A long pause. "Why?" "Because what I'm building now is worth more than anything you could take from me." Marcus laughed, the sound genuinely amused. "You really have gone soft. The Victor Hale I knew would never surrender this much leverage. The Victor Hale you knew didn't have anything worth protecting. Now I do." Another pause, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, his tone had shifted, less hostile, almost respectful. "I'm not going to use the files," he said. "Not against you, not against anyone. They're insurance, nothing more. And as long as you stay out of the game, we have no problems." Victor exhaled slowly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just stay retired, stay out of my way, and we'll pretend the last 15 years never happened." "Agreed." Marcus ended the call without another word. Victor set the phone down and found Rowan staring at him with tears in her eyes. "He let you go," she whispered. "He let us go." She crossed to him and wrapped her arms around him, careful not to disturb Jack. Victor held her with his free arm, feeling the weight of 15 years lift off his shoulders. "We're free," Rowan said against his chest. "We're actually free. We're free." That night, after the twins were asleep and Rowan was making dinner in the tiny kitchenette, Victor stood at the window looking out at Rainier Valley. It wasn't the view from his penthouse. It wasn't impressive or enviable or worth bragging about. But it was home. And for the first time in his life, Victor Hale understood the difference between safety and freedom, between control and connection, between building an empire and building a family. He'd chosen the harder path, the more vulnerable one, the one that required him to trust that love was stronger than leverage. And looking at Rowan moving around the kitchen, at the bassinets where his children slept peacefully, at the life he'd almost destroyed through fear and pride, Victor knew he'd made the right choice. The only choice that mattered. 6 months passed in a rhythm that felt both impossibly slow and terrifyingly fast. Victor sold the penthouse and moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from Rowan's building. It wasn't strategic, it wasn't temporary. It was just close enough that he could be there in minutes if she needed him, which she did, constantly. The twins were 6 months old now and entering what Rowan called the danger phase, where they could roll and grab but had no concept of consequences. Jack just tried to eat his own foot, Victor said one morning, rescuing his son from his latest experiment in flexibility. Is that normal? Completely normal. Wait until they start crawling, then nothing in this apartment will be safe. Rowan was preparing bottles with the efficiency of someone who could do it in her sleep, which she frequently did. How's the business meeting tomorrow? Victor settled Jack in his high chair and started spooning pureed sweet potato into his mouth, most of which ended up on Jack's face. Should be fine. Standard investment review, boring and legitimate. You say that like it's a bad thing. It's not. It's just different. Different was an understatement. Victor's new life bore almost no resemblance to his old one. He'd built a legitimate investment firm that focused on real estate development and private equity. The work was legal, profitable, and mind-numbingly tedious compared to running an underground empire, but it paid well enough to support himself and help Rowan without her feeling like he was trying to buy his way into her life. They'd settled into an arrangement that worked for both of them. Victor took the twins 3 days a week, so Rowan could work full-time at Family Bridges, where she'd been promoted to program director. The other 4 days, he worked while she handled childcare. Evenings they usually spent together, tag-teaming the elaborate routine of feeding, bathing, and putting 2 increasingly mobile babies to bed. It was exhausting and wonderful, and nothing like Victor had imagined his life would be. "Lily's getting another tooth," Rowan said, wiping drool from their daughter's chin. "Which means we're in for a rough few nights. I can take her tonight, give you a break. You took her the last 3 nights. So? I'm her father. That's what I'm supposed to do." Rowan looked at him with an expression he still couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and wariness, like she was waiting for him to realize this wasn't what he wanted and disappear. 6 months of showing up every day hadn't entirely erased 3 years of absence. "You're going to burn out," she said quietly. "I'm not going to burn out." Everyone burns out, Victor. That's what being a parent is. You give and give and give until you have nothing left, and then you find something else to give because they need you. Then we'll burn out together. That's better than you doing it alone. She smiled slightly. "When did you become so reasonable?" "When I realized being right all the time was less important than being present." It was true. The man Victor had been 6 months ago would have argued, would have insisted on his way, would have tried to control every variable. But fatherhood had a way of beating the control freak out of you. Babies didn't care about your plans or your logic or your carefully constructed strategies. They just needed you to show up and love them consistently. And Victor had discovered he was surprisingly good at that. Jack finished his sweet potato and immediately demanded more by banging his hands on the high chair tray. Lily, not to be outdone, started shrieking for attention. Rowan scooped her up while Victor refilled Jack's bowl, and they moved through the morning chaos with the practiced coordination of people who'd learned to work as a team. It wasn't until later, after the twins were down for their morning nap and Rowan had left for work, that Victor allowed himself to think about what had been bothering him for weeks. He wanted more than this arrangement, more than co-parenting and friendly partnership and carefully maintained boundaries. He wanted what they'd had 4 years ago, before fear and pride had destroyed it. He wanted Rowan back. But every time he considered saying something, he stopped himself. She'd been clear 6 months ago. Focus on being a father first. Everything else could wait. And Victor had respected that boundary because it was the right thing to do, and because he was terrified that pushing for more would make her pull away entirely. So he waited, and watched, and hoped that eventually she'd see him the way he saw her, not as a former mistake or a necessary co-parent, but as someone worth taking a risk on again. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while Victor was reviewing quarterly reports in his apartment. Leo's name flashed on the screen. They still talked occasionally, usually about the logistics of Victor's exit from his former empire. Most of the transitions had gone smoothly. Marcus had consolidated power exactly as expected. The city's underground economy was running as efficiently as it had under Victor's control, just with different management. "What's wrong?" Victor asked, because Leo never called in the middle of the day unless something was wrong. "We have a problem. Remember Anthony Russo?" Victor's stomach dropped. Anthony Russo had been a mid-level operator in Victor's organization, small-time drug distribution, mostly marijuana before it was legal. He'd been arrested 2 years ago on unrelated charges, and Victor had quietly arranged for his legal defense and family support in exchange for his silence. What about him? He's talking to the feds, offering testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence, and your name came up. What exactly is he saying? That you ran protection rackets in the international district, that you laundered money through your real estate holdings, that you ordered violence against rivals. Leo paused. He doesn't have proof of most of it, but he has enough details to make federal prosecutors interested. Victor closed his eyes and tried to think through the implications. He'd been clean for 6 months. Every business he owned now was legitimate. Every asset had been scrubbed and documented. But the past didn't disappear just because you walked away from it. How much exposure do I have? He asked. Realistically? If they dig deep enough, they'll find things. Enough to build a case for racketeering, maybe. Money laundering, definitely. You covered your tracks well, but federal investigators have resources and time. What are my options? You could run, disappear. You have enough money and enough connections to start over somewhere else. Victor thought about Rowan, about Jack and Lily, about the life he'd spent 6 months building. No, I'm not running. Then you need a lawyer, a good one, and you need to prepare for the possibility that this goes to trial. Set it up, whatever it costs. Victor, Leo hesitated, which was unusual. If this goes badly, you could be looking at serious time, 5 years minimum, probably more. Are you prepared for that? Was he prepared to go to prison? To miss years of his children's lives? To watch them grow up through supervised visits and phone calls? No, he absolutely was not prepared for that. But he also wasn't prepared to run and prove to Rowan that he was exactly the man she'd been afraid he was. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come, Victor said. Set up the meeting with the lawyer, I'll handle the rest. He ended the call and sat in silence, trying to figure out how to tell Rowan that the past he'd been running from had finally caught up to him. She deserved to know, deserved to make her own choice about whether she wanted to tie herself to someone who might be facing federal charges. But the thought of watching her face shudder, of seeing the trust he'd spent 6 months building crumble, made his chest tight. Still, there was no good way to delay this conversation. Victor grabbed his keys and headed to Rowan's apartment. She answered the door with Lily on her hip and confusion in her eyes. You're not supposed to be here until tonight. Is everything okay? We need to talk. The words came out more ominous than he'd intended. Rowan's expression shifted immediately to concern. She stepped aside to let him in, settling Lily in her playpen before turning to face him. What happened? Victor told her everything. About Anthony Russo, about the federal investigation, about the possibility that his past was about to become a very present problem. Rowan listened in silence, her arms crossed, her face carefully neutral. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So you might be going to prison, she said finally. Maybe. I don't know. The lawyer will have a better sense of the exposure once we meet. And if you do go to prison, what happens to Jack and Lily? What happens to us? I'll set up financial support. Make sure you're taken care of. Make sure they know I didn't abandon them by choice. That's not what I'm asking, Victor. Her voice was sharp now, edged with something that might have been anger or grief or both. I'm asking if you thought about them before you built your empire. If you considered that your choices might have consequences for people who didn't exist yet, but would someday depend on you. It was a fair question, and the answer was no. He absolutely had not thought about future children or future consequences beyond his own survival and success. I didn't think about them because I didn't think I'd have them, Victor said quietly. I didn't think I deserved them, and I built a life that reflected that belief. And now? Now I'd give anything to undo those choices. To go back and build something different from the start. But I can't. All I can do is face what's coming and hope that somehow I get to stay in their lives. Rowan's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I can't do this again, Victor. I can't watch you disappear. I can't explain to Jack and Lily why their father isn't here. I can't... Her voice broke. I can't fall in love with you again just to lose you. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Victor's heart was hammering so hard he could hear it. Again? he asked quietly. Rowan wiped her eyes roughly. Don't make me say it. Rowan, I never stopped loving you. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for months. I tried. I told myself you were wrong for me, that you'd chosen your empire over us, that I was better off alone. But then you showed up and you stayed and you did the work and you became everything I hoped you could be. And now you're telling me I might lose you anyway, and I don't know how to survive that. Victor crossed to her and took her hands, holding them gently. You're not going to lose me. Whatever happens, whatever consequences I face, I'm not disappearing. I'm going to fight this with everything I have. And if I can't fight it, I'll serve my time and come back. But I'm not abandoning you or them. Not ever again. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. Because the man I was 4 years ago might have run, might have chosen self-preservation over everything else. But I'm not that man anymore. You and Jack and Lily changed me, and I'm not giving up what we have without a fight. Rowan was crying in earnest now, her whole body shaking. Victor pulled her close and held her while she sobbed against his chest. Lily started fussing in her playpen, picking up on the emotional turbulence. Jack, asleep in his crib in the next room, remained blissfully unaware that his father's entire future was hanging in the balance. I'm so scared, Rowan whispered. I know, so am I. What are we going to do? We're going to meet with the lawyer, figure out the best defense, and we're going to trust that 6 months of doing the right thing counts for something. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. And if it doesn't? If you still end up facing charges? Then we deal with it together, as a family, as partners, the way we should have been doing all along. Rowan searched his face, and Victor saw the moment something shifted in her expression. Not quite hope, but something close to it. A willingness to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. Okay, she said softly. Then we fight. The lawyer's name was Patricia Chen, no relation to Marcus, she assured them, and she specialized in white-collar criminal defense. Her office was in a sleek downtown high-rise, all glass and steel and expensive furniture that radiated competence. She reviewed Victor's situation with the clinical precision of a surgeon examining a patient. Anthony Russo's testimony is problematic but not fatal, she said, tapping her pen against a legal pad. He can place you in proximity to criminal activity, but he can't provide direct evidence of your involvement. No recordings, no documents, no financial trails that lead definitively to you. So what's the exposure? Victor asked. If federal prosecutors pursue this aggressively, they could build a circumstantial case. Racketeering, money laundering, maybe conspiracy charges. But those cases are expensive to prosecute and difficult to win without hard evidence. She leaned forward. The more likely scenario is they'll try to flip you, offer immunity or a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against people higher up the food chain. I'm not testifying against anyone, Patricia raised an eyebrow. That's admirable, but it might be your best option for avoiding prison time. I don't care. I'm not putting a target on my family by testifying, and I'm not sending other people to prison to save myself. Rowan, sitting beside him, squeezed his hand. Patricia made a note. Then we prepare for trial, which means we need to establish that you've completely divested from criminal enterprises, that you're now a legitimate businessman, and that you have strong ties to the community that make you a low-flight risk. I have 2 6-month-old children, Victor said. I'm not going anywhere. Good. We'll emphasize that. We'll also emphasize your transition to legitimate business, your cooperation with authorities when applicable, and your lack of violent criminal history. She paused. But I need to be clear with you, Mr. Hale. Even with a strong defense, there's a real possibility you could be convicted. Federal prosecutors have a 90% conviction rate. If they decide to pursue this, the odds are not in your favor. Victor had faced long odds before, but never with this much at stake. What's our best-case scenario? Rowan asked quietly. Best case? They decide the case isn't worth prosecuting and drop it. More realistic best case? They offer a plea deal with minimal prison time, maybe 2 years, in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations. And worst case? 10 to 15 years on multiple counts. The number hit like a physical blow. 10 to 15 years. Jack and Lily would be teenagers before he got out. They wouldn't remember him. Wouldn't know him beyond stories and prison visits. Rowan's hand tightened on his until it almost hurt. "We fight," Victor said firmly. "Whatever it takes. We fight." Patricia nodded. "Then let's get to work." The investigation took 3 months. Federal agents interviewed dozens of people connected to Victor's former operations. They subpoenaed financial records. They built timelines and connection maps and theories about how his empire had functioned. And through it all, Victor showed up every day to be a father, to build his legitimate business, to prove that he genuinely changed. The waiting was excruciating. Every time his phone rang, he braced for Patricia calling to say they were filing charges. Every knock on the door made his heart race. Every moment with Jack and Lily felt both precious and fragile, like he was living on borrowed time. Rowan held steady through all of it. She didn't run, didn't pull away, didn't prepare herself for his absence the way Victor had feared she would. Instead, she moved closer, started staying at his apartment some nights, let him hold her when the fear got too overwhelming, talked about the future like they might actually have one together. "I was thinking about preschools," she said one evening while they were making dinner together. The twins were in their high chairs, smearing pureed peas across every available surface. "There's a Montessori program near Family Bridges that looks good." Victor paused in chopping vegetables. "You're planning for preschool? They're only 8 months old." "The good ones have wait lists. We need to get on them now if we want spots when they're 2. She glanced at him. "Unless you think we shouldn't plan that far ahead." The subtext was clear. "Unless you think you'll be in prison by then." "No," Victor said firmly. "We should definitely plan that far ahead. Put us on the wait list." Rowan's smile was small but genuine. "Us. I like the sound of that." "Me too." That night, after the twins were asleep and Rowan was reading in bed, Victor sat in the living room and thought about the future he wanted. Not the empire he'd built or the reputation he'd cultivated, just the simple, ordinary life of being a husband and father. He wanted to marry Rowan, wanted to stand in front of their friends and family and promise to choose her every day for the rest of his life. Wanted to make it official that Jack and Lily's parents were partners in every sense of the word. But asking her now, while federal charges hung over his head, felt selfish, like he was trying to lock her in before she had a chance to reconsider. So he waited, and hoped that he'd get the chance to ask when the future felt less uncertain. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Patricia's voice was carefully neutral. "The federal prosecutor wants to meet. Today, if possible." Victor's stomach dropped. "Are they filing charges?" "I don't know, but they wouldn't ask for a meeting unless they had something to say. Can you be at my office in an hour?" "I'll be there." He called Rowan, who was at work. She answered on the first ring. "It's happening," he said. "Meeting with the prosecutor today." A long pause. "Do you want me there?" "I always want you there, but you don't have to "I'll meet you at Patricia's office. 1 hour." She hung up before he could argue. Victor dressed carefully in a suit that screamed legitimate businessman, not criminal. He thought about Jack and Lily, asleep in his apartment under Mrs. Chen's watchful eye. Thought about Rowan and the life they were building. Thought about everything he stood to lose. Then he drove downtown to face whatever was coming. The federal prosecutor was a woman in her 40s named Sarah Martinez. She had the kind of sharp intelligence that had probably terrified law students and criminals alike. She sat across from Victor, Patricia, and Rowan in Patricia's conference room and laid out her case with brutal efficiency. "We have testimony from Anthony Russo placing you at the center of a criminal enterprise spanning 15 years. We have financial records suggesting money laundering through your real estate holdings. We have witness statements connecting you to protection rackets, illegal gambling operations, and drug distribution networks." She paused, letting the weight of it settle. "What we don't have is enough hard evidence to guarantee a conviction at trial. Your predecessor was very careful, which brings us to why we're here." Victor forced himself to breathe steadily. "I'm listening." "We're prepared to offer a deal. You cooperate with our ongoing investigations into organized crime in Seattle. You provide testimony and documentation about key players and operations. In exchange, we recommend a reduced sentence of 18 months in minimum security, followed by probation." "No," Victor said immediately. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "No?" "I'm not testifying against anyone. I'm not providing documentation. I walked away from that world 6 months ago, and I'm not going back. even as a witness. Mr. Hale, you're facing potentially 10 years in federal prison. This deal puts a target on my family. The second I testify, everyone I know becomes a potential threat. My children become collateral damage. I'm not doing that. Sarah looked at Patricia. Is your client understanding the gravity of his situation? He understands perfectly, Patricia said. He's making an informed choice to decline your offer. Then we'll proceed to trial, and I'll do everything in my power to make sure he's convicted. That's your prerogative, Patricia said calmly. We'll see you in court. Sarah gathered her papers, clearly frustrated, but as she stood to leave, she paused and looked at Victor with something that might have been grudging respect. For what it's worth, we've been investigating your activities for the last 6 months as well, and everything checks out. You're clean, completely legitimately employed, no questionable associations, no hidden assets. You really did walk away. She left before Victor could respond. The silence in the conference room was deafening. Well, Patricia said finally, that went better than expected. How? Rowan asked, her voice shaking. She basically said she's going to prosecute him. She also said their case is weak without his cooperation, which means if we go to trial, we have a fighting chance. Patricia looked at Victor. But I need you to understand, this is a huge risk. Federal prosecutors don't make offers like that unless they think their case has holes, but they also don't go to trial unless they think they can win. So we might win, Victor said. We might, or you might spend the next decade in prison. Rowan made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Those are terrible odds. They are, Patricia agreed, but they're the odds we have. Victor reached for Rowan's hand. I'm not testifying. I'm not putting our family at risk. So, we fight. We fight, Rowan echoed. Patricia nodded. Then let's prepare for trial. The trial was set for 6 months later, which gave them time to build a defense and, more importantly, time to live. Victor and Rowan decided not to waste it. They moved in together officially, combining their apartments into a larger space that could accommodate a family. They took Jack and Lily to the park on sunny days and watched them discover grass and swings and the endless fascination of other children. They had dinner with Mrs. Chen, who'd become an unofficial grandmother to the twins. They built routines and traditions and the foundation of a life that Victor hoped he'd get to keep. And 3 months before the trial, on a cool evening in October, Victor took Rowan to the rooftop where he'd proposed 4 years ago. "Why are we here?" she asked, looking around at the cityscape. "This place has kind of terrible memories. I wanted to replace them with better ones." He pulled a small box from his pocket and watched her eyes go wide. "Victor, I know the timing is terrible. I know I might be going to prison in 3 months. I know asking you to marry me right now is probably the most selfish thing I could do." He opened the box to reveal a simple band. No flashy diamond, just elegant and understated. "But I also know that I want to spend whatever time I have building a life with you. And I want Jack and Lily to know that their parents chose each other completely and without reservation." Rowan was crying, her hands covering her mouth. "I'm not asking you to wait for me if I'm convicted," Victor continued. "I'm not asking you to put your life on hold. I'm just asking you to marry me because I love you, and I want to be your husband, and I want to make that promise even if I can't keep it perfectly." "You idiot," Rowan said through her tears. "You beautiful, stubborn idiot." "Is that a yes?" "Of course it's a yes. It was always going to be yes." She held out her hand and let him slip the ring on her finger. "But we're doing this on my terms. No big wedding, no drama, just us and the twins and the people who matter. Whatever you want, and no secrets, no running, no making decisions without me." "Deal." She kissed him then, and Victor felt something in his chest unlock. Whatever happened at trial, whatever the future held, they were facing it together. They married 2 weeks later in Rowan's apartment with Mrs. Chen as witness, and the twins as unwitting participants. It was simple and quick and perfect, exactly what they both needed. Victor made promises he intended to keep for the rest of his life, and Rowan made promises that acknowledged she was taking a leap of faith. And for a few weeks, they were just a normal family, building a normal life. Then the trial began. The prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision. Anthony Russo testified to Victor's involvement in protection rackets. Financial experts walked through suspicious transactions. Former associates placed Victor at meetings where criminal activity was discussed. It was damning and circumstantial in equal measure. Patricia countered with character witnesses, people who could speak to Victor's transformation. Leo testified about the systematic dismantling of Victor's criminal enterprises. Business partners testified about his legitimate operations. And Rowan, calm and composed, testified about his commitment to being a father and his complete separation from his former life. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Victor spent those 3 days in a state of controlled panic. He held his children and helped with bedtime routines and tried not to think about the possibility that these might be his last days of freedom for a decade. On the 3rd day, the jury sent word they'd reached a verdict. Victor sat in the courtroom with Rowan on one side and Patricia on the other, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. The jury filed in, their faces carefully neutral. The judge read the verdict. On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant not guilty. Victor's heart stuttered. On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant not guilty. Rowan's hand found his, squeezing hard. On the charge of conspiracy to commit illegal gambling operations, we find the defendant not guilty. Not guilty. On all counts. The courtroom erupted in muted chaos. Patricia was smiling. Sarah Martinez was stone-faced. Rowan was crying into Victor's shoulder. "You're free," she whispered. "You're actually free." Victor wrapped his arms around his wife and let himself believe it. The past was finished. The empire was gone. And he had a future with the family he'd chosen. They walked out of the courthouse into bright October sunshine. Leo was waiting on the steps with a rare smile. Mrs. Chen was there with the twins in their stroller, both babies babbling happily. Friends from Family Bridges and Victor's new business had gathered to celebrate. "What now?" Rowan asked, looking up at him. Victor thought about all the things he'd lost over the past year. The power, the reputation, the control. And he thought about everything he'd gained: a wife, children, a legitimate life built on honesty instead of fear. "Now we go home," he said, "and we live." 2 years later, Victor stood in a small neighborhood park, pushing Jack and Lily on the swings while Rowan spread out snacks on a picnic blanket. The twins were 2.5 now, fully mobile and completely fearless in the way of children who'd never known danger. Jack was cautious but determined, carefully testing the limits of how high he could swing. Lily was loud and bold, demanding Victor push her higher, and laughing when the wind caught her hair. They were everything. "Higher, Daddy!" Lily shrieked. "Higher!" Jack echoed, not to be outdone. Victor obliged, watching them soar and feeling something fierce and protective settle in his chest. This was what strength looked like. Not empire, not control. Just showing up day after day for people who needed you. Rowan waved from the picnic blanket and Victor lifted both twins out of their swings. They protested loudly and carried them over to where she'd laid out sandwiches and fruit and juice boxes. "I have news," Rowan said as they settled on the blanket. "The board offered me a permanent position as executive director of Family Bridges. It's a big promotion. More responsibility, more travel, more everything." "That's amazing," Victor said, meaning it. "Are you going to take it?" "Only if you're okay with being the primary parent sometimes. I'd be traveling maybe once a month for conferences and fundraising." "Of course I'm okay with it. This is your dream, Rowan. Take the job." She smiled, and Victor saw the woman he'd fallen in love with 7 years ago, brilliant and passionate and completely capable of changing the world. "There's one more thing," she said quietly. "I went back to the orphanage where I grew up, the one that placed me in foster care when I was 6. Victor waited, sensing this was important. They're struggling. Funding cuts, staff shortages. The whole system is falling apart. And I keep thinking about all the kids who are growing up the way I did, feeling invisible, feeling like nobody chose them." She looked at him. "I want to do something about it. Maybe start a foundation. Use my position to advocate for reform. Actually make a difference instead of just managing programs. That's incredible. What do you need from me?" "Support. Partnership. Someone who believes I can actually do this, even when it feels impossible." Victor reached for her hand. "You can do anything. I've watched you raise 2 children while building a career while dealing with my chaos. Starting a foundation is nothing compared to that." Rowan laughed. "Flatterer. Truth teller." Jack wandered over with a fistful of grass and presented it to Victor like a gift. Lily was attempting to steal another child's ball and had to be redirected. Normal parenting chaos in a normal park on a normal Tuesday afternoon. It was perfect. That night, after the twins were in bed and the apartment was finally quiet, Victor found Rowan standing at the window looking out at their neighborhood. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different this is from what I imagined 4 years ago. How I thought I'd be raising them alone. How I never expected you to actually change. Do you regret giving me another chance?" "Not for a second." She turned in his arms to face him. "You became the man I always knew you could be. And you gave me the family I always wanted. That's not something I regret. Even with all the chaos and fear and federal trials, especially with all that, it proved you were serious, that you choose us even when it was hard." Victor kissed her forehead. "Choosing you has never been hard. It's the easiest thing I've ever done." They stood together in the quiet apartment, listening to the sounds of their children breathing in the next room. And Victor thought about the journey that had brought him here. From the red light where he'd seen Rowan crossing the street to this moment of absolute contentment. He'd been wrong all those years ago. Family wasn't weakness. Family was the only thing that had ever made him strong. "I love you," he said quietly. "I love you too," Rowan replied. "Even when you're being ridiculous. Especially when I'm being ridiculous." She laughed, and the sound filled the apartment with warmth. In the next room, Lily made a sound in her sleep, half protest, half dream. Jack responded with his own sleep mumble, the two of them communicating even unconscious. Victor and Rowan waited, ready to intervene if needed, but the twins settled back into silence. This was his life now. Midnight check-ins and sleep negotiations and the constant low-level worry that every parent carried. It was ordinary and exhausting and absolutely nothing like the empire he'd built. It was also infinitely better. Victor had spent 15 years building walls to protect himself from vulnerability, had convinced himself that power and control were the only things worth having, had nearly destroyed the best thing in his life because he was afraid of being weak. Now he understood that loving someone, really loving them, choosing them over and over even when it was terrifying, was the bravest thing a person could do. And he'd gotten to do it twice. Once when he walked away from his empire, and again every single day when he woke up and chose to be present for his family instead of chasing ghosts of who he used to be. "Come to bed," Rowan said, pulling him away from the window. "Tomorrow's going to be chaos and we need sleep." "Tomorrow's always chaos." "Exactly. So let's get rest while we can." They went to bed together, tangled up in each other the way they'd been before fear had separated them. And as Victor drifted off to sleep, his last thought was gratitude. Gratitude for the red light that had shown him what he'd lost, for Rowan's willingness to give him another chance, for Jack and Lily's existence, for the opportunity to become someone better than he'd been. He'd built an empire on fear and lost everything that mattered. Then he'd rebuilt his life on love and found everything worth having. And every single day, Victor Hale chose that love again. Chose his wife. Chose his children. Chose the ordinary, extraordinary life of being present and imperfect and exactly where he belonged. It was the best decision he'd ever made. And he would keep making it every day for the rest of his life.